Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The first thing I noticed when I stepped into the abandoned farmhouse was the smell. Musty wood, rotting cloth, and something sharper underneath, like old chemicals. I hadn't planned to explore the place. I was just taking photos of abandoned buildings in rural Montana for my blog, but the front door had swung open with a single push. The wooden floors creaked under my boots as I entered, and dust particles floated in the beams of afternoon sunlight coming through the dirty windows. My camera hung heavy around my neck as I moved from room to room on the first floor. The previous owners had left in a hurry. There were still dishes in the kitchen cabinets, moth-eaten curtains on the windows, and a few pieces of furniture covered in decades of dust. The air felt thick and stale. Each step kicked up small clouds that made my nose itch. The staircase to the second floor looked solid enough. I tested each step carefully, my hand on the wooden railing. More dust. More creaking. Upstairs, the hallway stretched in both directions. 4 closed doors. The one at the far end was different, larger, with ornate carvings around the frame. Something about it pulled at me. The brass doorknob turned easily in my hand. The room behind it was bigger than the others I'd seen, probably the master bedroom. Sheets covered most of the furniture, the bed, some chairs, what looked like a dresser. But what caught my eye was the tall object against the far wall. Even under its cloth covering, I could tell it was a mirror from the shape and size. My heart started beating faster as I approached it. I couldn't explain why. The cloth was thick and gray with age, but I could see it had once been white. My fingers left clear marks in the dust when I grabbed it. I hesitated for a second, then pulled. The cloth fell away easily, raising another cloud of dust that made me cough. When I could see clearly again, I froze. The face looking back at me from the mirror wasn't mine. Where my reflection should have been, I saw an old man. His skin was pale and wrinkled, his eyes dark and sunken. White hair hung in stringy clumps around his face. He wore old-fashioned clothes, a white collarless shirt with a dark vest. When I raised my hand to touch my face, the old man didn't move. I stepped back. My foot caught on the fallen cloth and I stumbled, catching myself against a covered chair. The old man in the mirror stayed perfectly still, watching me. My breath came in quick gasps. Sweat ran down my back despite the cool air. "This isn't real," I said out loud. My voice sounded strange in the quiet room. The old man's mouth didn't move. He just stared. I closed my eyes tight and counted to 10. When I opened them, he was still there. I moved to the side. Instead of following my movement like a normal reflection, the old man's head turned slowly to track me. His neck made a cracking sound that I heard clearly across the room. My legs felt weak. I wanted to run, but I couldn't look away from those dark eyes. The old man's mouth stretched into a smile, showing yellow teeth. His hand, bone-thin with long yellowed nails, pressed against his side of the glass. The mirror's surface rippled like water. The old man's fingers pushed through, reaching for me. They were gray and corpse-like in the dusty light. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet. My camera swung wildly on its strap as I fell. The back of my head hit something hard. When my vision cleared, I was lying on the floor. Blood pounded in my ears. The old man was fully out of the mirror now, standing over me. His clothes hung in rotting tatters. The smell of decay filled my nose. He reached down with those horrible hands. I scrambled backward on hands and knees, not caring about the splinters digging into my palms. My back hit the wall. The old man took a shuffling step toward me. His feet made wet sounds on the wooden floor. Another step. I could see maggots moving in the torn flesh of his face. My hand found something solid, one of the chairs. I grabbed it and swung with all my strength. The old man was faster than he looked. He caught the chair with one hand, yanking it from my grip. The wood crumbled to dust in his fingers. I ran. My shoulder slammed into the doorframe as I burst into the hallway. Behind me, I heard that wet shuffling getting closer. I took the stairs 3 at a time, nearly falling. Pain shot through my ankle when I landed wrong at the bottom. I ignored it and kept running. The front door had swung shut. I grabbed the handle, but it wouldn't turn. The old man's footsteps came closer. I spun around, pressing my back against the door. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, head tilted at an impossible angle. Those dark eyes fixed on me. His jaw unhinged, opening wider and wider until his face split in half. Something inside me broke. I threw myself at the nearest window. The old glass shattered. Pain ripped through my arms and shoulders as I forced my way through. I hit the ground hard, rolled, and ran. I didn't stop until I reached my car. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. I slammed the car into reverse, tires throwing gravel. As I spun the car around, I looked back at the house. The old man stood in the broken window, watching me. He raised one rotting hand in what looked like a wave. I drove for hours, taking random turns, too afraid to stop. My arms were covered in cuts from the window. Blood had soaked into my shirt sleeves. My ankle throbbed. None of it mattered. I just needed to get as far away as possible. It was dark when I finally pulled into a gas station. My hands were still shaking as I cleaned and bandaged my cuts in the bathroom. The fluorescent lights made my skin look gray and sickly in the mirror. For a second, I thought I saw something dark moving in my eyes, but it was gone when I blinked. I drove straight through the night to my apartment in Bozeman. The sun was rising when I finally collapsed into bed. Sleep came quickly, but it wasn't peaceful. I dreamed of dark eyes and reaching hands and that terrible smile. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had all been some kind of hallucination. Maybe I'd hit my head harder than I thought when I fell. The cuts on my arms were real enough, but I could have gotten those just from breaking the window in a panic. People see strange things in old houses all the time. The mind plays tricks. I uploaded the photos from my camera to my laptop. Most were what I expected. Exterior shots of the farmhouse, a few pictures of the rooms downstairs. Then I came to the last image. My coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. The photo showed the bedroom with the mirror. The cloth lay crumpled on the floor, and there in the mirror, clear as day, was the old man. His face was turned toward the camera, mouth stretched in that horrible smile. One hand pressed against the glass. I deleted the photo. Then I deleted all the others from that day. Then I wiped my hard drive completely. I threw the camera away. I didn't write about the farmhouse on my blog. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. Who would believe me? But that wasn't the end. Sometimes now, when I pass mirrors, I catch glimpses of something moving in them, just at the edge of my vision. A shadow, a face, those dark eyes watching me. If I look directly, it's gone, but I know it's there. My bathroom mirror is covered with a sheet. So is the one in my bedroom. I avoid looking at windows at night when they become mirrors in the darkness. I've started losing time, moments where I can't remember what I was doing or how I got somewhere. My friends say I seem different, distant. They say my eyes look strange sometimes. Yesterday I caught my reflection in a store window. For just a second, I saw the old man's face instead of mine. He smiled and waved. I smiled and waved back. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know what happened. The memory of that day feels like it's slipping away, being replaced by older memories. Memories that aren't mine. I remember a farmhouse, but not from last month. I remember it from decades ago when it was new. I remember the mirror being delivered, carried up those stairs by 2 strong men while I watched. I remember the first time I saw my own reflection change, saw someone else looking back at me. I remember reaching through the glass. I remember waiting, so patient, for someone else to come. Someone young and strong. Someone who could give me a new body, a new life. I remember everything now. The mirror is calling me back. I can feel it pulling at me, even from miles away. Soon I'll have to return to the farmhouse. Someone else will come exploring eventually. They always do. And I'll be waiting. watching from the other side of the glass. My hands shake as I write these last words. When I look at them, they seem thinner, the skin more wrinkled. There's dirt under the fingernails that won't come out. It smells like grave dirt. I have to go now. The mirror is waiting. Don't look for me at the farmhouse. And if you find it, don't go inside. Don't look in the mirror. He's always waiting, always hungry, always watching. And now, so am I. I don't sleep anymore. Not since that night 3 weeks ago. Every time I close my eyes, I see those smooth, blank surfaces where their faces should have been. The sleeping pills my doctor prescribed sit untouched on my nightstand. I can't risk falling asleep, not when that car might still be out there waiting. It started on a Tuesday evening in October. I was walking home from the subway after working late at the office, something I'd done hundreds of times before. The streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk, and the air had that sharp autumn chill that makes you walk a little faster. My neighborhood was quiet, too quiet, looking back. No dogs barking, no distant traffic noise, just the sound of my shoes on the concrete and my own breathing. I first noticed the car when I turned onto my street. A black sedan, maybe a Toyota or Honda. I couldn't tell in the dim light. It was parked about halfway down the block, engine off, but with its parking lights on. Something about it caught my attention. Maybe because I'd never seen it on my street before, or maybe because of how it was positioned slightly away from the curb at an odd angle. As I got closer, I could make out two figures sitting in the front seats. They appeared to be men, both wearing dark suits. The driver had his hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, perfectly still, like a mannequin. The passenger sat equally motionless, facing straight ahead. I told myself they were probably just waiting to pick someone up, or maybe having a late business meeting, but my pace quickened anyway. Something felt wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and my mouth went dry. When I was about 15 feet from the car, both men turned their heads toward me in perfect unison. That's when I saw it. Or rather, what I didn't see. Where their faces should have been, there was just nothing. Smooth, flesh-colored surfaces like department store mannequins, but somehow worse. No eyes, no mouth, no features at all. Just blank. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. I froze mid-step, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The faceless men continued to track my movement, their heads turning in sync to follow me. I heard a high-pitched ringing in my ears, and my vision narrowed to pinpoints. Fight or flight kicked in, and flight won. I ran. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, my dress shoes slapping against the pavement and my briefcase banging against my leg. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. I just ran the remaining 100 yards to my house, fumbled with my keys, and practically fell through the front door. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and slid down to sit on the floor, gasping for air. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type 911 into my phone. But then I stopped. What would I tell them? That I saw two men without faces? They'd think I was crazy or drunk. I made myself get up and peek through the front window. The car was gone. The street was empty and normal looking, like nothing had happened. I checked all the doors and windows twice, then went through every room in the house, turning on all the lights. I found nothing unusual, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe they were wearing masks. Maybe I was more tired than I thought, and my mind was playing tricks on me. I poured myself a double whiskey and sat in my living room, jumping at every small noise. Around midnight, exhaustion finally overcame fear, and I went up to bed. I left all the lights on in the house except my bedroom. Something about sleeping with the lights on felt too much like admitting that what I'd seen was real. The nightmare started normally enough. I was at work, doing something with spreadsheets, when my computer screen went blank. Then it showed the car, parked outside my office building. I tried to look away, but I couldn't move. The screen switched to show the inside of the car, those two blank faces turning slowly toward me. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:17 a.m. Something compelled me to look out my second-floor bedroom window, even though every instinct screamed not to. The car was there. It sat in exactly the same spot as before, parking lights on, angled slightly away from the curb. Even from up here I could see them. Two dark figures sitting perfectly still, their featureless heads turned up toward my window. I scrambled backward off the bed, tangling in the sheets and hitting the floor hard. I crawled to the corner of the room as far from the window as possible. My whole body was shaking and I could taste copper in my mouth where I'd bitten my tongue. For hours, I sat there in the dark, afraid to move, afraid to look out the window again. When dawn finally came, I gathered my courage and looked. The street was empty. I called in sick to work. Spent the day researching missing persons cases in my area, looking for any mentions of faceless men or mysterious black cars. I found nothing concrete, just some vague conspiracy theories and creepypasta stories that didn't match what I'd seen. That night, I drove to a hotel 20 miles away. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I used cash, gave a fake name at check-in. I took 2 sleeping pills and passed out watching infomercials with all the lights on. At 3:17 a.m. I woke up. The TV was showing static. And there, in the parking lot right outside my 3rd-floor window, I checked out immediately. Drove aimlessly until sunrise, my hands clenched so tight on the steering wheel that my fingers cramped. The next few nights followed the same pattern. No matter where I went, different hotels, my sister's house in the next state, even a campground 50 miles from the nearest town, they found me, always at 3:17 a.m., always in that same car, their blank faces turned toward wherever I was trying to sleep. I started doing research at the library, going through old newspapers and local history books. I found a pattern of strange disappearances in the area going back decades, people who vanished without a trace, often after reporting being followed by a mysterious car, but nothing about faceless men. One night, about a week after it started, I decided to confront them. I parked my car across the street from where they usually appeared and waited, loaded with caffeine pills and energy drinks. At 3:15 a.m., I saw headlights approach. The black sedan pulled into its usual spot. I got out of my car, hands shaking but determined. I walked toward them, my footsteps echoing in the empty street. They turned their blank faces toward me in unison. "What do you want?" I shouted. My voice sounded thin and scared, even to my own ears. They didn't respond, didn't move, just kept watching me with those horrible non-faces. I got within 10 feet of the car, close enough to see details I hadn't noticed before. Their suits were perfectly pressed without a single wrinkle. Their hands were pale and smooth like wax, and their faces, looking at them up close was like trying to focus on a blind spot in my vision. My mind couldn't quite process what it was seeing. The passenger door opened with a click that made me jump. Neither figure had moved to open it. I ran again. The next day, I went to the police. Told them I was being stalked by someone in a black sedan. Left out the part about the faces. They took a report, told me to call if I saw the car again. Their bored expressions told me they'd heard similar stories before and didn't expect anything to come of it. I installed security cameras around my house. Bought a gun, even though I'd never owned one before. Started sleeping in 2-hour shifts during daylight hours only. Lost my job when I stopped showing up for meetings. The cameras never showed anything. The car would be there when I looked out the window at 3:17 a.m., but the footage only showed an empty street. I tried taking pictures with my phone, but they came out blurry or completely black. Last night, something changed. They showed up at the usual time, but instead of just watching, they got out of the car. I watched from my window as they walked with unnaturally smooth movements toward my front door. Their feet made no sound on the pavement. Their blank faces reflected the streetlight like polished bone. I heard my front door unlock. I hadn't unlocked it. I heard footsteps on the stairs, perfectly in sync. Getting closer. I'm writing this now because I need someone to know what happened. Need someone to understand what's out there. They're outside my bedroom door now, I can see their shadows under the doorframe, slightly too tall, slightly too thin to be human. The doorknob is turning. I hear them breathing, but it doesn't sound like breathing should sound. It's more like the noise a radio makes between stations, but wet somehow. They're in my room now, standing at the foot of my bed. Their blank faces are turned toward me as I type these last words on my phone. They're reaching for me with hands that don't bend quite right at the joints. If you're reading this, they're real. They're out there. And if you ever see a black sedan parked at an odd angle, with two men sitting too still in the front seats, don't look at their faces. Just run. My hands won't stop shaking as I type this. I need to write down what happened at the Riverside manufacturing plant tonight. Maybe someone will make sense of it. Maybe someone will believe me. I'm an urban explorer, or at least I was until 2 hours ago. I've been doing this for 6 years, documenting abandoned places across the Midwest. Old hospitals, defunct schools, empty factories. I've seen them all. Nothing prepared me for what I encountered in that factory. The Riverside plant shut down in 1989 after some kind of industrial accident. The details are sketchy, something about chemical contamination and worker safety violations. The building's been rotting on the outskirts of town ever since. I'd driven past it dozens of times, eyeing those broken windows and crumbling brick walls. Tonight, I finally decided to check it out. I parked my truck behind some overgrown bushes at 9:45 p.m. The clouds covered the moon, making it perfect for sneaking in unnoticed. I grabbed my backpack with the usual gear: flashlight, spare batteries, first aid kit, camera, water bottle. The fence had a gap where someone had cut through the chain link. I squeezed through, my jacket catching on the rusty wire. The front entrance was boarded up tight, but I found a broken window on the side of the building. The glass crunched under my boots as I climbed through. The beam of my flashlight cut through total darkness. Dust particles floated in the light. The air felt thick and stale, with a sharp chemical smell that made my nose burn. I stepped carefully across the debris-covered floor. My footsteps echoed off bare concrete walls. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. Most of the machinery had been stripped out years ago, leaving only empty mounting brackets and severed pipes. Graffiti covered some walls, but not as much as you'd expect for a place abandoned this long. The first floor was boring, just empty rooms and fallen ceiling tiles. I found the stairs to the basement and second floor in the center of the building. The basement door was welded shut with heavy steel plates. Weird. I'd never seen that in an abandoned building before. I headed up to the second floor. The metal stairs groaned under my weight. More empty rooms up here, but different equipment mounting points. This must have been where they did the actual manufacturing. Long rows of support columns stretched into the darkness. The beam of my flashlight caught something white on the floor ahead. I walked closer. A stack of papers scattered across the concrete. I picked one up, some kind of internal memo dated 1989. The letterhead said, "Project Echo Status Report." Most of it was too faded to read, but I made out phrases like unexpected results and containment protocols. A loud crash behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, just a piece of ceiling falling. Get it together, I told myself. This place was just making me jumpy. I kept moving down the main corridor, sweeping my light back and forth. More papers. Old filing cabinets tipped on their sides. A break room with a calendar still showing March 1989. The corridor ended at a set of heavy steel double doors. A faded biohazard symbol was stenciled on them. My hand hesitated on the push bar. Every urban explorer instinct told me to turn back. But I'd come this far. The doors opened with a screech of rusty hinges. Beyond them was some kind of laboratory space. Lab benches lined the walls, covered in dusty glassware and equipment. The center of the room held what looked like giant steel pressure vessels, connected by a maze of pipes. My flashlight beam caught more papers scattered across a desk. These were different, handwritten notes in messy scrawl. Day 47. Sample continues to display anomalous properties. Mass fluctuations increasing. Day 51. Containment field unstable. Request immediate evacuation of non-essential personnel. Day 52. God help us. The last note ended in a jerky scrawl trailing off the page. My hands were sweating now. What the hell had they been doing in here? A soft scraping sound from the corridor behind me. I turned quickly, light beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing there. But the sound came again, like something being dragged across concrete. Hello? My voice sounded small in the huge space. No response. I started walking back toward the corridor. The scraping got louder, closer. My light caught something at the far end of the hallway, a shadow. But wrong somehow. Too tall, misshapen. It moved with a jerking motion that wasn't quite human. I froze. The shadow stayed at the edge of my light beam. My heart hammered against my ribs. Sweat ran down my back despite the cold air. I took a step forward, raising the flashlight higher. The shadow vanished. Just gone, between one blink and the next. I ran the light beam across the empty corridor. Nothing there. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the flashlight. I told myself it was just my imagination. Weird shadows playing tricks in the dark. But I knew that wasn't true. The scraping sound came again, behind me now, much closer. I spun around. For a split second, my light caught it. A shape like a person, but wrong. Too tall, limbs too long. Its head brushed the ceiling 9 feet up. The proportions were all distorted, like someone had grabbed a human shape and stretched it. The beam of light passed through it like smoke. It vanished again. But I felt it was still there, just outside the range of my flashlight. Watching. I ran. I don't remember consciously deciding to run, my body just moved. Back through the lab, down the corridor. The scraping followed, getting closer. I hit the stairs at full speed, taking them 3 at a time. My foot slipped on the metal grating. I caught the railing, wrenching my shoulder. The scraping echoed in the stairwell, right above me. I didn't look up. I slammed through the door to the first floor. More running. My flashlight beam bounced wildly. I could barely see where I was going. Something brushed against my back. Cold, like being touched by fog. I screamed. The sound echoed off the walls. Behind me, something else screamed back, a sound no human throat could make. I saw the broken window ahead. I dove through it, not caring about the glass. I hit the ground hard, scrambled up, ran for the fence. The cut section caught my jeans as I squeezed through. I ripped free, leaving fabric behind. I made it to my truck. The engine roared to life. I floored it out of there, gravel spraying. In my rearview mirror, I saw something in an upstairs window of the factory, just for a moment. A stretched, distorted silhouette against the darkness. I didn't stop driving until I got home. Locked all the doors. Turned on every light in the house. My hands are still shaking as I write this. I don't know what I saw in that factory. I don't want to know, but I keep thinking about those notes. What were they working on in there? What went wrong? And most of all, is it still contained in that building? Or did I let something out? The scraping sound is back. Outside my window now, getting closer. I have to go. I shouldn't have taken that shortcut through Miller's Woods. That's what started everything. I was just trying to save 20 minutes on my drive home from the conference in Portland. Now I don't know if I'll ever make it home. It was already dark when I turned off the highway onto the unmarked dirt road. My GPS had lost signal, but I remembered passing through this area before. The road wound through dense forest, trees pressing in close on both sides. After about 10 minutes of driving, my headlights caught something through the trees, an orange glow that shouldn't have been there. I slowed down, thinking maybe there was a house or a campsite. The glow got brighter as I rounded a bend, and that's when I saw them. 5 or 6 figures standing in a circle around a bonfire. They weren't moving, just standing there, perfectly still, facing the flames. My foot instinctively hit the brake. Something felt wrong about the way they were standing there. Too still, too rigid. The orange light from the fire cast long shadows behind them, stretching out into the darkness like black fingers. I couldn't make out their faces from where I sat in my car. They were about 50 yards away, partially hidden by trees. But even at that distance, something about their posture made my skin crawl. Normal people don't stand that still. One of them turned their head toward my car. Just their head, while their body stayed perfectly rigid. That's when my heart started hammering against my ribs. I couldn't see a face, just a dark oval where a face should be. My hands were shaking as I put the car back in drive. I needed to get out of there. Now. I pressed the gas pedal and the car lurched forward. As I passed the bonfire, I kept my eyes straight ahead. Don't look. Don't look at them. But I couldn't help it. My eyes flicked to the side for just a second. They had all turned their heads to watch me pass, 6 black ovals tracking my car's movement, still not moving their bodies. Fuck this, I muttered, pressing harder on the gas. The dirt road was rough, and my car bounced violently as I sped up. I just needed to get back to the highway. After 5 minutes of driving, I should have reached the highway. But the dirt road kept going. Trees pressed in on both sides, branches scraping against my car. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. Another 5 minutes passed, still no highway. My chest felt tight. I knew I should have reached it by now. The road curved and twisted through the dark forest, but it wasn't taking me anywhere. I checked my phone again. No signal. The clock read 9:47 p.m. I drove faster, taking the curves as fast as I dared. The trees were a dark blur on either side. 10 more minutes passed. The road kept going. My gas gauge caught my eye. The needle was getting close to empty. Panic clawed at my throat. I had filled up right before leaving Portland. The tank should have been nearly full. I slammed on the brakes and the car skidded to a stop in the middle of the road. Gravel crunched under my tires. I sat there, breathing hard, hands clenched on the steering wheel. This wasn't possible. I knew this road. It was just a short connector between 2 highways. I shouldn't have been able to drive this long without hitting the highway or running out of road. I put the car in reverse and turned around. I'd go back the way I came, find the highway I'd turned off of. But after driving for another 15 minutes, I still hadn't found it. The road just kept going, curving endlessly through the dark woods. The gas gauge needle was now hovering just above empty. I had to stop, had to think. I pulled over to the side of the road and killed the engine. The silence pressed in around me. No traffic sounds, no distant highway noise, just the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. I checked my phone again. 10:22 p.m., still no signal. A branch snapped somewhere in the woods. My head jerked toward the sound. Nothing but darkness between the trees. Another snap, closer this time. Then another. Something was moving out there. I fumbled with my keys, trying to get them back in the ignition. They slipped from my sweaty fingers and fell to the floor. I bent down to grab them, and when I sat back up, there was a figure standing at the edge of the trees. I froze. It was one of them from the bonfire. The same rigid posture, the same black oval where the face should be. My fingers finally found the keys. I jammed them into the ignition and turned. The engine coughed, but didn't start. No, no, no. I turned the key again. Nothing. More snapping sounds from the woods. More figures emerging from the darkness. They moved in a strange way, like badly operated marionettes. Their legs and arms jerked and swayed, but their torsos stayed perfectly straight. I tried the engine again. It caught this time, roaring to life. I slammed the car into drive and floored it. The road stretched ahead of me, curving forever into the darkness. I drove until the engine started to sputter. The gas gauge needle was now firmly on empty. I coasted to a stop in the middle of the road. The engine died with a final choke. Silence again. Just my ragged breathing and the tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. What was I supposed to do now? I had no phone signal, no gas, no idea where I was. The sound of footsteps on gravel made me jerk upright. They were coming from behind the car. Slow, uneven footsteps. The crunch, drag, crunch of something that didn't walk quite right. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I couldn't. The footsteps got closer. Crunch, drag, crunch. A shadow fell across the driver's side window. I squeezed my eyes shut. My whole body was shaking. I could feel it standing there, just inches away on the other side of the glass. A soft tapping sound. Something was touching the window. Tap, tap, tap. Each tap was followed by the sound of something wet and sticky peeling away from the glass. I opened my eyes. A hand was pressed against my window. It was wrong. Too long. Too thin. The fingers ended in points instead of nails. It tapped again. The fingertips made a wet sucking sound as they pulled away from the glass. I lunged across to the passenger side and threw the door open. I tumbled out onto the gravel and ran. I ran straight into the woods, away from the road. Branches whipped at my face. I tripped over roots and fallen logs, but kept running. After what felt like hours, I had to stop. My lungs were on fire. I doubled over, hands on my knees, gasping for air. When I caught my breath, I looked around. Trees stretched in every direction. I had no idea which way I'd come from. Then I saw it, an orange glow through the trees. The bonfire. No, that wasn't possible. I'd run for miles in the opposite direction. But there it was. And there they were, the figures standing around it, perfectly still. I turned and ran again. I ran until my legs gave out and I collapsed. When I looked up, the bonfire was there again, always the same distance away, always those figures standing around it. I've been running for hours now, or maybe days. My phone died long ago. I have no way to tell time anymore. Every time I think I've gotten away, I see that orange glow through the trees, those black shapes standing around it. Sometimes I hear them moving through the woods, that weird jerking walk. Those two long fingers tapping against tree trunks. I'm sitting on a fallen log now, writing this on the back of some old receipts I found in my pocket. My legs are shaking too badly to run anymore. The bonfire is still there, through the trees. Waiting. I think I understand now. This place, the road, the woods, all of it. It's like a trap, a web. And I'm the fly that flew into it. The figures are moving away from the fire now, spreading out into the woods. I can hear them getting closer, those uneven footsteps. Crunch, drag, crunch. They're coming for me. I'm going to run again. I have to, even though I know it won't matter, even though I know I'll just end up back here. I can see their shapes moving between the trees now, those black oval faces turning toward me. Their arms are reaching out, fingers stretching longer and longer. I have to go. If anyone finds this, stay off that road. Don't take any shortcuts through these woods. Because once this place gets hold of you, it doesn't let go. I can hear them right behind me now. Their breathing sounds like wet leather being stretched. I'm running. God help me. I'm running. But I can already see the orange glow ahead of me through the trees. The cabin shouldn't have been there. I'd hiked this trail in the Cascades dozens of times and I'd never seen it before. But there it was, sitting in a small clearing about 50 yards off the main path, partially hidden behind a stand of Douglas firs. The sun was setting and I needed to make a decision fast. I checked my phone. No signal as expected this deep in the wilderness. My water bottle was almost empty and the temperature was dropping. The forecast hadn't mentioned rain, but the dark clouds gathering overhead told a different story. The first drops hit my face as I stood there, debating. A crack of thunder made up my mind for me. I turned off the main trail and pushed through the undergrowth toward the cabin. My boots crunched on dead pine needles as I approached. It was a simple structure, rough-hewn logs, a tin roof gone rusty with age, one door, and two windows on the front face. Nothing special about it except that it shouldn't have been there. The rain picked up, drumming against my rain jacket. I reached the cabin's small covered porch just as the sky opened up completely. Water poured off the roof in sheets. Through the sound of the rain, I heard something else, a scraping noise from inside the cabin. I pressed my face against the nearest window, cupping my hands around my eyes to block the glare. The glass was grimy, but I could make out what looked like a single room inside. And there, in the growing darkness, movement. A pale light, like someone walking around with a phone flashlight, drifting past pieces of furniture I couldn't quite make out. "Hello?" I called out, knocking on the window. "Anyone home? Sorry to bother you, but the storm caught me off guard. Could I wait it out on your porch?" No response, but the light kept moving. I tried the other window, wiping away years of dirt with my sleeve. The weak light bobbed and weaved through the room, but I still couldn't see who was holding it. Something felt off about the way it moved, too smooth, like it was floating. I knocked harder. "Hey, I can see your light in there. I'm not trying to intrude, I just need to get out of this rain." The light stopped moving. I waited, heart pounding harder than it should have been. The rain intensified and a gust of wind drove water under the porch roof, soaking my pants. I had to make a choice, wait out here and get hypothermia, or go inside and deal with whoever was in there. I tried the door handle. It turned easily, which surprised me. The door swung open with a long creak. "I'm coming in," I announced loudly, "just to get out of the storm. Don't shoot or anything, okay?" I stepped inside, water dripping from my clothes onto rough wooden floorboards. The cabin was dark, but enough light filtered through the windows for me to see that it was completely empty. No furniture, no people, no source for the light I'd seen moving around. I pulled out my own phone, using its flashlight to sweep the room. The floor was covered in a thick layer of dust, undisturbed except for my own wet footprints. Cobwebs hung in every corner. The walls were bare logs, and a rusty wood stove sat cold and dead against the far wall. That was it. No signs that anyone had been here in years. I turned back to the windows, shining my light through them from the inside. Maybe I'd been seeing reflections of something, but no. The rain wasn't that heavy yet when I'd first seen the lights, and they'd moved with purpose, not like random reflections. A loud crack of thunder made me jump. I moved to close the door, but stopped when I noticed something strange about my footprints in the dust. They didn't match my boots. Looking closer, I saw they were bare footprints, much smaller than my size 11 hiking boots. I shone my light back at my feet to confirm what I already knew. I was still wearing my boots, and they were leaving the boot prints you'd expect. But right next to them, appearing with each step I took, were those smaller bare footprints. My heart started hammering. I spun around, sweeping the light across the room again. Still empty, still dusty, still abandoned. But now I noticed other things. Scratch marks on the walls, some fresh enough that tiny wood splinters still clung to them. Dark stains on the floorboards that I really didn't want to examine too closely. And there, in the corner, a pile of something that looked like old clothes. I walked closer, trying to ignore the double set of footprints I was leaving. The pile resolved itself into what looked like hiking gear, a shredded backpack, torn clothing, a crushed water bottle. All of it covered in that same thick dust that coated everything else. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop suddenly. My breath came out in visible puffs. The beam of my phone flashlight dimmed, flickered, and went out. I pressed the power button frantically, but nothing happened. Through the windows, I could see the storm had gotten worse. The trees outside were barely visible through the rain and growing darkness. That's when I saw it again, that pale light floating through the room. But now I was inside with it, and I could see it clearly. It wasn't a flashlight. It wasn't a reflection. It was just light, hanging in the air like a glowing fog, drifting in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. I backed toward the door, my shoes scraping against the floorboards. The light stopped moving. Slowly, it began to coalesce, gathering itself into a more defined shape. I reached behind me for the door handle, found it, and pulled. The door didn't budge. I yanked harder, rattling the whole frame. Nothing. The light was still condensing, taking on an almost human form. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. My fingers were going numb on the door handle. "No," I said out loud, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "This isn't happening. This isn't real." The light finished forming. It hung in the air about 6 feet off the ground, a vaguely human-shaped collection of pale luminescence. No clear features, but I had the distinct impression it was facing me. The bare footprints next to mine suddenly made a lot more sense. I threw my shoulder against the door. Pain shot through my arm, but the door held firm. The glowing figure began to move toward me, trailing wisps of light like smoke. The air grew colder with each foot it advanced. My mind raced through options. The windows were too small to climb through quickly. The wood stove was too heavy to use as a weapon. Against what, anyway? How do you fight a floating light? The pile of torn gear in the corner suggested others had tried and failed. The figure was halfway across the room now. I could hear a sound coming from it, like breathing, but wrong somehow. Too wet, too ragged. My own breath was coming in short gasps, creating a fog of condensation in the freezing air. I backed away from the door, moving sideways along the wall. Maybe if I could get around it, reach the other side of the cabin. The figure stopped its advance, turning to track my movement. That breathing sound got louder. My boot hit something solid, the wood stove. I was trapped in the corner now, the cold metal of the stove at my back, the glowing figure between me and any escape route. It resumed floating toward me, more quickly now. The breathing sound changed to something else, a high, keening noise that made my teeth hurt. The figure's light pulsed in rhythm with it. 5 feet away now. 4 feet. 3. In desperation, I grabbed the handle of the wood stove's door. It was frozen solid, covered in rust, but pure adrenaline gave me the strength to yank it open. The hinges screamed in protest. The figure rushed at me. I dove to the side, rolling across the dusty floor. There was a sound like a strong wind, and suddenly the glowing form was sucked into the wood stove like smoke up a chimney. I slammed the door shut with all my strength. The temperature in the cabin began to rise immediately. Outside, the storm was already passing, fragments of sunset visible through breaks in the clouds. I heard a click behind me, the cabin's front door swinging open on its own. I didn't wait around to see what would happen next. I ran, splashing through mud and rain-soaked underbrush, not stopping until I reached the main trail. My phone came back to life, showing 3 missed calls from my wife. It was fully charged. I made it back to my car just as full dark settled in. As I drove home, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as hallucination brought on by dehydration or exhaustion, but I knew better. The torn gear in the corner, the scratch marks on the walls, the bare footprints appearing beside my own. It had all been real. I've been back to that trail many times since then, always in full daylight. I've never found the cabin again. Sometimes I wonder if it's still there, hiding behind different trees, waiting for another hiker to get caught in a storm. Sometimes on cold nights I dream about that pale light and that wet, ragged breathing. But mostly, I wonder about those other hikers, the ones whose gear I found torn and dusty in the corner. Did they make it out like I did? Or are they still there somehow, their essence trapped in that old wood stove, their bare footprints appearing beside the boots of new visitors? I don't hike alone anymore, and I always make sure I'm back at my car well before sunset, no matter what the weather forecast says. Some questions are better left unanswered. Some cabins are better left unfound. The next morning I went to the ranger station to report what I'd seen. The ranger listened patiently, taking notes. When I finished, he pulled out an old file from a cabinet behind his desk. "You're not the first," he said, showing me a stack of similar reports dating back to the 1950s. "The cabin appears during storms, always in different locations. We've tried to find it, but..." He shrugged. "The only people who see it are the ones who aren't looking for it." He showed me photos from previous encounters, all different cabins, but somehow I knew they were all the same place. Some of the photos showed lights in the windows. In one, if you looked closely, you could just make out a human-shaped glow through the glass. "What should we do about it?" I asked. The ranger closed the file and put it away. Nothing to do. Can't find something that doesn't want to be found. Just be grateful you made it out and spread the word. When hiking these trails, always carry emergency gear. Always have a plan, and never ever trust a cabin that shouldn't be there. I nodded and left the station. On my way home, I stopped at a sporting goods store and bought new hiking gear, including an emergency shelter just in case. The next time I got caught in a storm on the trail, I wasn't going to need a cabin's hospitality. But sometimes, on rainy nights, I find myself drawn to the windows of my house, looking out into the darkness. And sometimes, just for a moment, I think I see a pale light drifting through the trees at the edge of my property. When that happens, I close the blinds, turn on all the lights, and wait for morning. Because I know now that some shelters are better left unused, some doors are better left unopened, and some lights are better left unfollowed. The bare footprints I left in that cabin's dust are probably still there, appearing alongside my boot prints, telling a story that nobody else will believe. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that somewhere in those woods, a cabin is waiting for its next visitor, its windows glowing with a light that shouldn't exist. I just hope they're smarter than I was. I hope they keep walking. I didn't believe in ghosts until last weekend. Now I can't sleep without checking every corner of my bedroom twice and making sure all my doors are locked. What happened in that mansion changed everything I thought I knew about reality. I need to write this down while it's still fresh in my mind, even though my hands are shaking just thinking about it. It started when I found the rental listing online. A Victorian mansion in the countryside, 3 hours from the city, at an unbelievable price for a weekend stay. The photos showed high ceilings, antique furniture, and sprawling grounds. I needed to get away from my demanding job in tech, and this seemed perfect. The booking process was simple, too simple looking back now. I arrived Friday afternoon. The property manager, Mrs. Henderson, met me at the iron gates with a set of heavy brass keys. She was a thin woman in her 70s with wire-rimmed glasses and gray hair pulled into a tight bun. "Everything you need is inside," she said, handing me the keys. Her fingers were ice cold when they brushed against mine. "The nearest town is 30 minutes away. Cell service is spotty out here. Landline's in the kitchen if you need it." She paused, then added, "Try not to wander the halls too much after dark. The floorboards are old. Wouldn't want you to trip." Something in her tone made my neck prickle, but I brushed it off. She got into her beige Volvo and drove away, leaving me alone with the mansion looming above me. 3 stories of weathered red brick and tall windows, white trim that needed painting, dead vines crawling up the walls. I unlocked the front door and stepped into a massive foyer. The air inside was stale and cold despite the warm September day outside. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor as I explored the first level. Formal dining room, library, sitting room, kitchen. Everything was immaculately clean, but felt frozen in time, like a museum display. Heavy velvet curtains, ornate wallpaper, oil paintings of stern-faced people in Victorian clothing. The kitchen had been modernized with new appliances, at least. I unpacked my groceries and made coffee, trying to shake off the weird feeling settling in my gut. Just typical old house vibes, I told myself. I'd grown up in apartments, wasn't used to all this space and silence. I spent the afternoon working on my laptop in the library. Around 6 p.m., I heard it for the first time. Footsteps on the floor above me. Clear and distinct. Heel toe. Walking from one end of the second floor to the other. I froze, coffee cup halfway to my mouth. I was completely alone in this house. I'd checked every room myself. The footsteps stopped, then started again, moving back in the opposite direction. My heart pounding, I got up and walked to the base of the main staircase. "Hello?" I called up. "Is someone there?" Silence. I climbed the stairs slowly, wincing at every creak of wood under my feet. The second floor was empty. I checked every room, turning on all the lights. All the windows were locked from the inside. No signs anyone had been there. Back downstairs, I told myself it was just the house settling. Old buildings make weird noises. I made dinner and tried to distract myself with Netflix on my laptop. That's when I found the letters. They were tucked inside a drawer in the library desk, yellowed pages covered in spidery handwriting dated 1892. I started reading and felt my blood turn to ice water. My dearest Elizabeth, I must tell you about the strange occurrences in this house. Every night I hear footsteps in the halls, but when I look, no one is there. Doors open and close on their own. Objects move when I'm not looking. Last night I woke to find every candle in my room lit, though I'd extinguished them before bed. The servants whisper about the previous owner, Mr. Harrison, who died here in his study. They say he still walks the halls, searching for something. I fear I'm losing my mind. Please come soon. I cannot bear another night alone here. Your loving sister, Margaret. There were more letters, each more disturbing than the last. Margaret wrote about seeing shadows move against the walls, about waking to find her belongings rearranged, about hearing whispers in empty rooms. The last letter was different, written in shaky, frantic handwriting. Elizabeth, something is in this house with me. It stands in my room at night. I can feel it watching. The servants have all fled. I must leave this place before... The letter ended mid-sentence. I should have left right then. Should have gotten in my car and driven back to the city. Rental agreement be damned. Instead, I put the letters back and told myself they were fake. Probably planted there to spook tourists. Ghost stories to add atmosphere to a historic rental property. The sun had set while I was reading. The library felt different in the dark, the tall bookshelves casting long shadows in the lamplight. I decided to head up to bed. I'd chosen a bedroom on the second floor, the master suite with a 4-poster bed and attached bathroom. I was brushing my teeth when the TV in the bedroom turned on by itself. The sudden blast of sound made me jump. Toothpaste splattered on the mirror. I walked out of the bathroom to find static flickering across the TV screen, filling the room with gray light and white noise. I hadn't even realized there was a TV in the room. It was an old model, the kind with dial knobs. I looked for a remote but didn't see one. The TV wasn't even plugged in. My hands shook as I turned the power knob. The screen went black. I pulled the unplugged cord out from behind the TV and held it up, staring at it, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That's when the footsteps started again, right outside my bedroom door. I stood perfectly still, listening. Heel toe, slow and deliberate. They stopped directly outside my door. The temperature in the room plummeted. I could see my breath misting in the air. The doorknob began to turn. I lunged forward and grabbed it, holding it in place. My heart was trying to punch through my ribs. The knob kept turning against my grip like someone on the other side was fighting to open it. "Who's there?" I shouted. My voice cracked. "This isn't funny." The pressure on the doorknob released. The footsteps moved away down the hall. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore, then yanked the door open. The hallway was empty and dark. All the doors were closed except one at the far end, the door to the study. It was wide open, though I distinctly remembered closing it during my earlier search. I walked down the hall on shaking legs, holding my phone's flashlight out in front of me. The study was empty. A leather armchair sat behind a massive oak desk. More oil paintings watched me from the walls. Everything was still and silent. Then I saw the fresh footprints in the dust on the floor. They started in the middle of the room and walked to the desk, then vanished. I ran back to my room, slammed the door and wedged a chair under the handle. Grabbed my phone to call for help. No signal, just like Mrs. Henderson had warned. The landline. I needed to get to the landline in the kitchen. But that meant going back out there. I sat on the bed trying to think rationally. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe someone else had a key. Maybe this was an elaborate prank. Maybe I was having some kind of breakdown from work stress. The TV turned on again. This time, instead of static, a face appeared on the screen. A man's face, pale and gaunt, with dark hollows around his eyes. He stared directly at me through the screen. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. I scrambled off the bed and ran for the door, yanking the chair away. Threw the door open and sprinted down the hallway toward the stairs. I could hear footsteps running behind me, getting closer. I took the stairs 2 at a time, nearly falling. Made it to the first floor and ran for the kitchen. The footsteps were right behind me now. Something cold brushed against the back of my neck. The kitchen was dark. I slapped the light switch, but nothing happened. Fumbled my way to where I remembered seeing the landline on the wall. My fingers found it, picked up the receiver. Dead silence. No dial tone. A voice whispered directly in my ear. "You found my letters." I dropped the phone and spun around. In the dim light from my phone's screen, I saw him, the man from the TV. He was semi-transparent, like smoke given human form. His feet didn't quite touch the floor. I'd never run so fast in my life. I sprinted for the front door, grabbed my car keys from the entry table. Behind me, every door in the house began slamming open and closed. The temperature dropped until I could see ice crystals forming on the windows. The chandelier in the foyer swung wildly, though there was no wind. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. Finally, the door opened and I ran outside into the warm night air, jumped in my car and started the engine. As I sped down the driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror. The man's face was in my back window, those hollow eyes staring at me. I blinked and he was gone. I drove straight back to the city, breaking every speed limit. Called Mrs. Henderson the next morning to tell her I'd left early. She didn't sound surprised. "Did you find anything interesting in the library?" she asked. I hung up without answering. The property listing has disappeared from the rental website. I've tried researching the history of the house but found nothing about Margaret or Mr. Harrison. Sometimes I dream about those footsteps coming down the hall. Sometimes I wake up to find my TV on, showing only static. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I swear I can hear a whisper, "You found my letters." I'm moving next week, getting rid of my TV, changing my phone number. But I can't shake the feeling that whatever was in that house is still with me, still watching, still waiting. I know how this sounds. If someone had told me this story a week ago, I would have laughed it off. But I know what I experienced. I know what I saw. And I know that somewhere in that mansion, in a drawer in the library desk, those letters are waiting for the next person who comes looking for a quiet weekend away. Three days ago, I walked into room 115 at the Starlight Motel just off Route 22, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and the weight of my mistakes. Today, I'm writing this from a hospital bed, trying to make sense of what happened in that room. The doctors say my injuries will heal, but I know the scars inside my head never will. I need to get this down while it's still fresh, while I can still remember every detail of that night. Maybe then someone will believe me. I chose the Starlight because it was the kind of place that didn't ask questions. The neon sign flickered with half its letters burned out, and the parking lot was more potholes than pavement. Perfect for someone who needed to disappear for a while. $28 a night, cash only. The room smelled like stale cigarettes and cheap cleaning supplies, with water stains spreading across the ceiling like yellow continents on a grimy map. The first 2 nights passed in a blur of cheap whiskey and fitful sleep. I barely left the room, surviving on vending machine snacks and tap water that tasted like pennies. The TV only got 3 channels clearly, all playing reruns of shows I'd seen 100 times before. But I didn't care. I wasn't there for entertainment. It was 3:17 a.m. on the 3rd night when the first sound jerked me awake. A soft thump from inside the wardrobe against the far wall. At first I thought it was just the ice machine down the hall kicking on. That thing had been making weird noises since I checked in. I rolled over, pulling the thin blanket tighter around my shoulders. Then I heard it again, louder this time, deliberate, like someone knocking from the inside. I sat up, my heart already picking up speed. The wardrobe was a cheap piece of furniture, particle board covered in fake wood veneer, with doors that didn't quite line up. I'd thrown my duffel bag inside when I first arrived, but hadn't opened it since. The knocking came again. 3 distinct taps, followed by what sounded like scratching. "Hello?" My voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. The room's only light came from the vacancy sign outside, casting everything in a sickly red glow. The scratching stopped. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my bare feet touching the thin carpet. The air felt different somehow, heavier, like the moments before a storm. My mouth was dry and I could hear my pulse in my ears. Another knock. This time it was 5 rapid taps, like someone trying to get my attention. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking slightly. The 12 feet between the bed and the wardrobe felt like a mile. Each step made the carpet crunch under my feet, probably decades of dirt ground into the fibers. The wardrobe door rattled slightly. "Who's there?" I called out louder this time, trying to sound braver than I felt. No answer, just more scratching. I reached for the baseball bat I'd brought with me. Old habits die hard. The aluminum felt cool and reassuring in my sweaty grip. 3 more steps to the wardrobe. The scratching got more frantic, like someone or something was trying to claw their way out, or in. I couldn't tell which was worse. My hand touched the wardrobe's handle. The metal was ice cold against my palm. The scratching stopped instantly. I took a deep breath, tightened my grip on the bat, and yanked the door open. My duffel bag lay exactly where I'd left it. But the back wall of the wardrobe, Jesus Christ, the back wall. Long, deep gouges ran from floor to ceiling, some fresh enough that small splinters of particle board still clung to the edges. They formed no pattern I could recognize, just wild, desperate marks of something trying to break through. I reached out and touched one of the grooves. It was deep enough to fit my fingertip inside, and the edges were sharp. These weren't made by rats or raccoons. They were too big, too deliberate. They looked like human fingernail marks. The smell hit me then, a musty, organic odor like wet earth and decay. It seemed to pulse from the scratches themselves, growing stronger with each second. I slammed the wardrobe shut and backed away until my legs hit the bed. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. For 5 minutes, nothing happened. I stood there, bat ready, staring at the wardrobe. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the distant hum of traffic on Route 22. Then the knocking started again. Not from inside the wardrobe this time, but from inside the wall behind it. I crossed the room in 3 steps and pressed my ear against the wallpaper. The knocking was clearer now, moving slowly from right to left. Following it with my ear, I traced its path as it traveled along the wall, around the corner and into the bathroom. The bathroom light wouldn't turn on. I flicked the switch up and down repeatedly, but nothing happened. The red glow from the vacancy sign barely reached inside, leaving most of the small room in darkness. The knocking continued, now coming from inside the bathroom wall, right behind the mirror. I stepped inside, my reflection barely visible in the dim light. The knocking stopped, then I saw it. In the mirror over my right shoulder, a shadow moved. Just for a second, but I'm sure I saw it. A dark shape like someone ducking out of view. I spun around. Nothing there. The shower curtain hung still and straight, no one hiding behind it. When I turned back to the mirror, the shadow was gone. But something else had changed. My reflection. The eyes were wrong. They were my eyes, but they weren't blinking when I blinked. They were staring at me unmoving while I stood there frozen in horror. The reflection's mouth started to move, forming words I couldn't hear. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't respond. Those eyes held me there, forcing me to watch as the reflection's face began to change. The skin around its eyes darkened like bruises spreading in fast motion. Its mouth stretched wider, wider than any human mouth should go. The teeth. There were too many teeth. I finally managed to move, stumbling backward out of the bathroom. I slammed the door shut and wedged the chair from the desk under the handle. The knocking started again immediately, this time from all around me. Every wall, the ceiling, the floor. It was everywhere. The sound got louder and louder until it felt like my skull would split. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. I ran to the door, fumbling with the chain lock with shaking hands. That's when the lights went out. Not just in my room. The whole motel went dark. The vacancy sign outside died. plunging everything into absolute darkness. In that darkness, I heard something new, a wet, sliding sound like something dragging itself across the carpet. It was coming from the direction of the wardrobe. I finally got the door open and burst out into the parking lot. The night air hit me like a slap, shockingly cold against my sweat-soaked skin. I ran to the office, pounding on the door, but no one answered. Looking back at room 115, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The curtains in my window were moving, but not like they were being blown by wind. Something was pushing against them from inside, something with long, thin fingers that left dark streaks on the fabric. I ran to my car, hands shaking so badly I dropped the keys twice before getting the door open. As I started the engine, I looked in the rearview mirror. The reflection's eyes were wrong again. I don't remember much after that. The police report says they found my car wrapped around a tree 3 miles from the motel. They had to cut me out of the wreckage. When they searched room 115, they found nothing unusual. The wardrobe was empty except for my duffel bag. The walls were solid. The mirror in the bathroom showed no signs of tampering, but they didn't find the camera from my phone either. I had dropped it during my panic, and it must still be in that room. If anyone finds it, they'll see what I saw. The last photo I managed to take shows the back wall of the wardrobe. The scratches spell out words. I won't write them here. I can't. But I see them every time I close my eyes, and I know they're true. They're a warning, or maybe a promise. Either way, I know they're meant for me. The doctors say I can go home tomorrow, but I know I'll never really leave that room. Part of me is still there, staring into that mirror, watching my reflection change. Sometimes, when I look in mirrors now, I have to blink first just to make sure my reflection blinks too. And every night, just before I fall asleep, I hear it. That soft, steady knocking coming from inside my walls. I know what's making that sound now. I know what left those marks in the wardrobe. And I know it followed me home. But the worst part? The part that keeps me awake night after night? I'm starting to think it was always there. In every room I've ever slept in. Just waiting for me to notice it. Waiting for me to open that door. And now that I have, it won't let me forget. The doctors are coming now. They say I need to rest, but I had to get this written down first. I had to tell someone what really happened in room 115. Because last night I looked at my hands under the hospital room lights, really looked at them for the first time since the accident. My fingernails are worn down to nothing, and there are splinters under what's left of them. I can't sleep anymore. My hands shake when I try to write this down. But I need to tell someone what happened 3 nights ago in that parking garage. Maybe then someone can explain it. Maybe then I'll stop seeing that thing every time I close my eyes. I worked late that night at the office like I usually do. The Anderson account needed finishing, and I'd promised the client I'd have it done by morning. By the time I packed up my laptop, it was already 11:45 p.m. The office building was empty except for the night janitor mopping the hallway outside my door. The parking garage connected to our building through a covered walkway on the 3rd floor. During the day, it was always packed with cars from the various businesses in the complex. But at night, most of the 500 spaces sat empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, creating pools of sickly white light between long stretches of shadow. I remembered checking my phone as I walked across the concrete bridge to the garage. My wife had texted twice asking when I'd be home. I typed out a quick response. Leaving now, 20 mins. That's when I first saw it. The figure stood by the elevator bank about 50 feet ahead. It wore a black hooded robe that reached the floor, completely hiding any features underneath. The hood pointed straight ahead, toward the elevator doors. I stopped walking. Something felt wrong. The shape was too still, like a photograph. No subtle movements, no shifting of weight, no signs of breathing, just absolute stillness. My footsteps had echoed loudly in the empty garage, but the figure hadn't turned to look. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds watching. It didn't move at all. Hello? I called out. My voice bounced off the concrete walls. No response. I pulled out my phone again and opened the camera app. The screen showed the empty elevator bank. I lowered the phone and looked up. The figure was still there. My heart started beating faster. I raised the phone again. Nothing in the frame. Lowered it. The figure stood exactly as before. I backed up a few steps, keeping my eyes fixed on the shape. My foot hit something, probably a small piece of concrete, and I glanced down for a split second to keep from stumbling. When I looked up, the figure had moved closer, much closer. It now stood about 20 feet away, but I hadn't heard any footsteps. The hood still pointed straight ahead, not at me. "Who are you?" I shouted. My voice cracked. Sweat ran down my back despite the garage's cold air. Again, no response. I took another step backward, fumbling for my keys. The rental car fob had a panic button. If I could just... I blinked. The figure now stood 10 feet away. Same position, same stillness, but closer. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys. The clang of metal on concrete echoed through the garage. I quickly snatched them up, keeping my eyes locked on the figure. That's when I noticed something else wrong. The robe didn't move. There was always some air movement in the garage from the ventilation system, enough to stir up dust and bits of paper. But the black fabric hung perfectly still, like it was frozen in place. I jabbed the panic button repeatedly. The car's alarm started blaring and the headlights flashed, filling the garage with sound and strobing light. In those alternating moments of brightness and shadow, I saw it happen. Each time the lights flashed on, the figure had moved. 15 feet to the left, then behind a concrete pillar, then next to a parked car. Each new position brought it closer to me in a circular path, but I never saw it move. In the dark moments between flashes, there was no sound of footsteps, no whisper of fabric, no indication of movement at all. It simply appeared in each new spot, like a sequence of still photographs. I ran. I don't remember making the conscious decision. My body just moved. I sprinted toward the stairs, my dress shoes slapping against the concrete. The car alarm continued wailing behind me. I slammed through the stairwell door and took the steps 3 at a time, gripping the railing to keep from falling. My breath came in ragged gasps that echoed in the enclosed space. Second floor. First floor. I burst out into the garage's ground level and ran toward the exit. The security gate was down, but there was a man-sized gap next to it for pedestrians. If I could just reach it... I looked over my shoulder. The figure stood at the top of the stairs I'd just descended, visible through the small window in the stairwell door. As I watched, it vanished. I spun around and there it was, blocking my path to the exit, 20 feet away. Hood still pointing straight ahead, not at me. I veered left, running between parked cars. My lungs burned, sweat soaked through my shirt. I had to find another way out. A glimpse of movement made me turn my head. The figure stood on top of an SUV, still in that same rigid pose. I looked away and looked back. Now it was crouched on the hood of a sedan closer to me. Look away, look back, standing on the concrete barrier at the garage's edge. Each time I saw it, the hood still pointed straight ahead, never at me. But somehow I knew it was watching. I reached the far corner of the garage. A chain-link fence separated the parking structure from the street. Beyond it, I could see cars passing on the main road. People. Safety. The fence was 8 feet high and topped with barbed wire. I'd never climbed anything like that before, but terror gave me strength. I jumped, grabbed the metal links, and started pulling myself up. The streetlight on the corner cast my shadow on the fence as I climbed, and behind it, I saw another shadow join mine. I looked back. The figure stood directly below me, hood tilted up now. Where a face should have been, there was only darkness. Not the darkness of shadow, a deeper darkness that seemed to swallow the light. My hand slipped on the fence. I was only halfway up. The figure didn't move, but its robe began to change. The fabric rippled and split, opening like a flower made of black smoke. From the darkness within, something started to emerge. I screamed and let go of the fence. I fell backward, expecting to crash into the figure below me. Instead, I hit the concrete hard enough to knock the wind from my lungs. The figure was gone. I lay there gasping, every breath sending spikes of pain through my ribs. The fence's shadow now stretched empty across the ground. When I could breathe again, I rolled onto my hands and knees. Blood dripped from my scraped palms onto the concrete. I pushed myself up, scanning in all directions. Nothing. Just rows of parked cars and empty spaces under buzzing fluorescent lights. I stumbled to my feet and limped toward the exit, holding my side where I'd landed hardest. Every few steps I spun around to check behind me, but the garage remained empty. I made it through the pedestrian gap and out onto the street. A couple walking their dog gave me strange looks as I hurried past, probably because of my disheveled appearance and obvious injuries. I walked the 6 blocks to my house instead of going back for my car. Every streetlight I passed seemed to create too many shadows. Every dark doorway or alley entrance made me flinch. When I finally reached home, I double-checked every lock and turned on all the lights. My wife was asleep upstairs. I didn't wake her. What could I say? I sat in the living room until morning, jumping at every sound. I called in sick to work the next day, and the next. I couldn't face that parking garage again. Today I finally went back, but only during daylight hours and with 2 security guards accompanying me to get my car. I kept expecting to see that figure standing between the vehicles, or reflected in the windows, or lurking by the elevator bank. But there was nothing. The security footage from that night shows nothing either. I watched it frame by frame with the head of building security. The cameras caught me walking into the garage, standing still for several minutes, then suddenly running. The figure never appeared on any of the recordings. But I know what I saw. The absolute stillness, the impossible movements, the darkness where its face should have been, and whatever was starting to emerge from within that robe. I'm writing this all down now because I need someone else to know. Because I'm afraid of what might happen next. You see, an hour ago I glanced out my living room window and saw something standing under the streetlight across from my house. A black-robed figure, hood pointing straight ahead. I blinked and it was gone, but I know it's still out there. Watching. Waiting. And next time, I don't think I'll be able to run away. The sun is setting now. The shadows in my house are getting longer. Soon it will be dark, and I keep catching movement at the edge of my vision. Quick glimpses of something black and still. I don't want to look, but I know I will. We always look. Maybe this time I'll finally see what's inside that robe. Maybe this time, the rest of the document is blank. The concrete gave way beneath my feet without warning. 1 second I was walking across the factory floor, the next I was falling through darkness. The impact knocked the wind out of me. I lay there gasping, staring up at the jagged hole in the ceiling 15 feet above me. The beam from my flashlight had survived the fall, casting a weak circle on the basement wall. That's when I saw the claw marks. Deep gouges in the concrete, each groove thick as my thumb. They ran in parallel sets of 4, scoring the wall from floor to ceiling. My hands shook as I ran the beam along them. The cuts were clean, like they'd been made by something incredibly sharp and strong. The concrete was industrial grade, meant to last decades. Whatever had done this had torn through it like paper. A drop of water hit my neck and I jumped. The basement smelled of mold and rust and something else. A sharp animal stink that made my nose wrinkle. The air felt thick and stale. I needed to get out of here. Fast. My phone showed no signal, but at least the screen provided extra light. The basement stretched into darkness in both directions. To my right, the beam caught what looked like a doorway. To my left, more claw marks and pipes running along the ceiling. The doorway seemed like my best shot at finding stairs. I started walking, keeping my light trained on the ground to avoid tripping. The floor was littered with debris, broken pipes, chunks of concrete, old machinery parts. My footsteps echoed no matter how carefully I stepped. A low growl stopped me cold. It came from somewhere in the darkness ahead. Deep, guttural, like no animal I'd ever heard. The sound vibrated in my chest. I switched off my flashlight instantly, plunging myself into darkness. My heart pounded so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Another growl, closer this time. And a scraping sound, like claws dragging across concrete. I backed away slowly, trying to control my breathing. My back hit the wall and I froze. In the dim light filtering down from above, I saw movement. Something massive shifted in the shadows 20 feet ahead. The stink grew stronger, raw meat and wet fur and decay. I could hear it breathing now, heavy, wet breaths that wheezed slightly on the exhale. My flashlight slipped in my sweaty grip. I clutched it tighter, debating whether to risk turning it on. The thing hadn't attacked yet. Maybe it couldn't see me in the dark. A snuffling sound. It was scenting the air. It knew I was here. The scraping got louder as it moved closer. My eyes had adjusted enough to make out a shape. Something on 4 legs, but wrong somehow. Too big. The proportions weren't right. Its shoulder height had to be over 5 feet. I held my breath as it passed through the shaft of light from above. Gray, hairless skin pulled tight over bulging muscles. A long, thin tail that ended in a bony club. The head was the worst part. No eyes that I could see, just a wide mouth filled with rows of needle teeth like a deep-sea creature. But this was no fish. This thing had evolved to hunt in the dark. It turned its head toward me and opened its mouth. A long tongue emerged, tasting the air. The teeth gleamed wetly. I ran. The creature's roar shook dust from the ceiling as it gave chase. I sprinted blindly through the darkness, one hand on the wall to guide me. My flashlight beam bounced wildly as I ran. The thing was fast, impossibly fast for its size. Its claws screeched against the concrete floor as it pursued me. I spotted a narrow gap ahead, some kind of maintenance corridor between 2 concrete walls. I dove for it just as the creature lunged. Its claws raked across my back, shredding my jacket. The pain was immediate and intense, but I'd made it into the gap. The thing was too big to follow. It slammed against the entrance, its claws scrabbling at the concrete as it tried to reach me. The sound of its frustration was deafening in the confined space. I scrambled deeper into the corridor, my back burning. I could feel blood soaking through my shirt. The maintenance tunnel was barely wide enough for me to move sideways through it. My flashlight revealed pipes and electrical conduit running along the walls. The creature's roars echoed behind me, accompanied by the sound of concrete being torn apart. It was trying to widen the gap. I kept moving as fast as I could, checking every intersection for a way up. The tunnel branched repeatedly, forming a maze of narrow passages. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I found a metal ladder bolted to the wall. It led up to some kind of access hatch. I grabbed the rungs and started climbing, my arms trembling with exhaustion and blood loss. A crash echoed through the tunnels. The thing had broken through. I climbed faster, ignoring the pain. I could hear it coming, moving through the passages far more quickly than should have been possible for something its size. The sound of concrete being pulverized grew closer. The hatch was padlocked. I braced myself on the ladder and kicked it as hard as I could. Once, twice. On the 3rd kick, the rusty lock broke. I shoved the hatch open and pulled myself up into what looked like a storage room. The creature's roar was right below me now. I slammed the hatch shut and dragged a heavy metal shelf on top of it. The whole shelf shuddered as something slammed into the hatch from below. I staggered to the door and out into a hallway. Emergency exit signs pointed left. I ran, the sound of metal being torn apart spurring me on. The exit door appeared ahead, a rectangle of daylight that seemed impossible after the darkness below. I hit the crash bar and burst out into the parking lot. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys as another roar echoed from inside the building. The engine started on the first try. I floored it out of the lot, gravel spraying behind me. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of something moving in the shadows of the loading dock before the factory disappeared around a bend. I drove straight to the emergency room. They patched up my back. 4 deep gashes that required dozens of stitches. I told them I'd been attacked by a large animal while hiking. They assumed it was a bear. I never reported what I'd really seen. Who would believe me? But I think about that creature often. About what it is and how long it's been down there. About whether it's alone. The factory was demolished 2 months later. The official reason was structural instability. They filled in all the underground spaces with concrete before they knocked it down. Sometimes I drive past the empty lot at night, and sometimes I swear I can hear something moving beneath the new concrete. Something big, something hungry, something waiting. But that's impossible, isn't it? The claw marks on my back have healed into thick scars. The doctor said they'd never seen animal wounds quite like them. Sometimes they ache when the weather changes, like they're trying to remind me. As if I could ever forget. I don't go into old buildings anymore. I don't like dark places. And I never ever go into basements. Because now I know what can be waiting in the darkness below. I know there are things in this world that shouldn't exist. Things that have evolved in the hidden places, in the spaces we've forgotten. Things with too many teeth and no eyes. Things that hunt by sound and smell. Things that have learned to break through concrete walls to reach their prey. The worst part isn't the memories of what I saw. It's knowing that it's still out there somewhere, that it survived the demolition, that it's probably found new hunting grounds, new dark spaces to inhabit. So if you're exploring an abandoned building and you find claw marks on the walls, don't dismiss them. Don't try to explain them away. And if you hear a deep growl echoing up from below, run. Run as fast as you can, and don't look back. Because if you see what's chasing you, if you get a good look at what made those marks, you'll never be able to forget it. Trust me, I know. The votive candles shouldn't have been burning. I know this because I checked the closure notice posted on the front door. St. Michael's Church had been shut down for 8 months, but there they were, dozens of small flames flickering in red glass holders, casting moving shadows on the altar. I stood in the entrance, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The air smelled stale and dusty, like all abandoned buildings do, but there was something else. A faint trace of incense, the kind they used during Mass. My footsteps echoed on the worn marble floor as I moved forward. I'm a real estate photographer. The diocese hired me to document the building before its scheduled demolition next month. I photographed hundreds of empty buildings, but something felt different here. The temperature dropped at least 10 degrees the moment I stepped inside. I could see my breath. The main aisle stretched ahead, lined with empty wooden pews. Dust covered everything, except for those burning candles. My watch showed 2:47 p.m., but inside it felt like twilight. The stained glass windows were so caked with grime that they barely let any light through. I pulled out my camera and started taking test shots, adjusting the settings for the low light. The click of the shutter seemed too loud in the silence. Through the viewfinder, I noticed some movement in one of the back pews. I lowered the camera. A figure sat there, head bowed. The shape was grayish-white and slightly transparent, like fog given human form. I could see the wood grain of the pew through its body. My hands started shaking. The camera strap slipped from my sweaty fingers, and the sound of it hitting the floor echoed through the church. The figure's head snapped up. It looked like an old woman, but her features kept shifting and blurring, like trying to see someone's face underwater. Her mouth moved in silent prayer. The air grew colder, so cold it hurt to breathe. I took a step forward. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through mud. The figure flickered like a bad TV signal. Another step, and she became even less distinct. By my third step, she had vanished completely. My heart pounded against my ribs. Sweat ran down my back despite the cold. I grabbed my camera from the floor and forced myself to walk to that pew. The wood was covered in a thick layer of dust, completely undisturbed. No one had sat there in months. I should have left right then. Any sane person would have. But I'm a photographer. Documenting things is what I do. And I knew that if I walked out without investigating, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what I'd seen. I set up my tripod and mounted the camera. Maybe if I couldn't approach directly, I could at least capture evidence. I positioned myself in the center aisle, about 30 feet from where I'd seen the figure. The viewfinder showed nothing but empty pews. A sound made me freeze. The soft creak of old wood bending under weight. It came from the choir loft above the entrance. I turned slowly, keeping the camera ready. Another figure stood at the railing, this one more solid-looking than the first. A man in priest's robes, his face stern and gaunt. He stared down at me for several seconds, then turned and walked through the wall behind him. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the camera again. The temperature had dropped even further. I could see ice crystals forming on the pews. The votive candles at the altar flickered wildly, though there was no wind. More creaking sounds came from different parts of the church. Shadows moved at the edges of my vision. When I looked directly at them, they vanished, but I could feel them watching me. The candles went out all at once. Complete darkness fell. My flashlight flickered and died. I fumbled for my phone, but it was dead too. Fear crushed my chest like a vice. A voice whispered right next to my ear, "You shouldn't be here." I ran. I slammed into pews in the darkness, stumbled, got up, kept running. My hip hit something hard, probably the holy water font near the entrance. Pain shot through my leg, but I didn't stop. I burst through the front doors into the afternoon sunlight. My car sat in the empty parking lot, right where I'd left it. I drove away so fast the tires squealed. That night I developed the photos. Most showed exactly what you'd expect, an empty, dusty church. But in one frame, barely visible in the background, a dozen transparent figures knelt in the pews. Their faces were turned toward the altar, mouths moving in silent prayer. I called the diocese the next morning and told them I couldn't complete the job. They were surprisingly understanding. The secretary even seemed to expect it. "You saw them, didn't you?" she asked. "The ones who won't leave?" She explained that 3 other photographers had quit before me. The first demolition crew walked off the job too. Apparently, the congregation had dwindled over the years until only a small group of elderly members remained. When the diocese announced the closure, these last faithful members protested. Some even threatened to chain themselves to the pews. Most of them passed away within months of the closure, the secretary said. But if you ask me, they're still there, still praying, still trying to save their church. I asked about the burning candles. "Nobody's been inside that building in months," she said. "The utilities were cut off. There's no electricity, no gas. Those candles you saw, they couldn't have been burning. But I know what I saw. I have the photographs to prove it. And sometimes, late at night, I can still hear that whispered warning. You shouldn't be here. The demolition has been delayed indefinitely. The official reason is permit issues, but I know better. You can't tear down a church when its congregation refuses to leave, even if that congregation isn't technically alive anymore. I drive past St. Michael's sometimes, always in broad daylight. The building looks dead and empty, with boards over the windows and chains on the doors. But at dusk, if you park across the street and watch carefully, you might see a warm glow through the cracks in those boards. The light flickers like candle flames, and if you listen very carefully, you might hear the faint sound of prayers being whispered by voices that haven't drawn breath in years. I won't go back inside. Some places belong to the dead, and the living need to respect that. But I often think about those figures in the pews, still faithfully attending their services long after their church was closed. There's something both beautiful and terrifying about that kind of devotion, a devotion so strong that not even death could end it. The diocese eventually assigned the job to another photographer. I tried to warn him, but he just laughed it off. Ghost stories, he said. Religious superstition. He quit the next day, never explained why. The latest I heard, they're considering renovating the church instead of demolishing it. The secretary told me they've had a sudden increase in donations, all anonymous, all in cash. The envelopes appear mysteriously in the diocese office mail, always containing exactly the same amount, $19. 54. That was the year St. Michael's was built. I still have the photos I took that day. Most of them stay locked in a drawer, especially that one with the praying figures. But I kept one shot, framed it, and hung it in my office. It shows the altar with those impossibly burning candles, their flames bright and steady in the dusty air. It reminds me that some things can't be explained by logic or reason. Some bonds are too strong to be broken by something as simple as death. And sometimes, if you're quiet and still enough, you might catch a glimpse of those who refuse to say goodbye to the places they loved in life. Just don't try to get too close. Don't try to understand. And if you hear a voice telling you that you shouldn't be there, listen to it. The living have their places. The dead have theirs. It's best for everyone if we respect that boundary. But sometimes, in quiet moments, I wonder about those figures in the church. Are they trapped there? Or did they choose to stay? Are they angry about the closure? Or simply dedicated to their prayers? Do they know they're dead? I'll never know the answers. That's probably for the best. Some mysteries should remain mysteries, and some questions are better left unasked. All I know for certain is this. In an abandoned church on the edge of town, candles still burn on the altar. Transparent figures still kneel in prayer. And if you listen carefully in the darkness, you might hear whispered words and voices that haven't spoken aloud in years. Just don't get too close. Don't try to make contact. And if you see the candles burning, turn around. Walk away. Some doors are better left closed. Some boundaries are better left uncrossed, and some prayers are meant only for the dead to hear. The engine light had been blinking for the past 20 miles. I knew I should have filled up back in Preston, but I was trying to make good time getting to Seattle. Now here I was, crawling along Route 12 at 11 p.m., the gas gauge needle buried deep in the red. The darkness pressed against my headlights like a solid wall. My phone showed no service bars. The last road sign I'd passed warned, "Next service is 47 miles." I was about to pull over and wait for morning when I spotted a dim light ahead. As I got closer, I made out the shape of a gas station, if you could call it that. Just two ancient pumps under a sagging metal overhang. The sign read, "Last Stop Gas and Convenience." Most of the letters were burned out. A single fluorescent light flickered over the entrance, drawing moths that cast giant shadows on the cracked concrete. I pulled up to the nearest pump, killing the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy. Through the streaked windows of the store, I could see a few other customers inside. That was good. At least the place was actually open. I got out shivering as the cold mountain air hit me. The door chime rang as I walked in, but nobody looked up. An old man in flannel studied a rack of beef jerky like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. A woman in scrubs stared intently at her coffee cup. The teenage clerk behind the counter kept his eyes fixed on a newspaper. "Evening," I said. No response. I cleared my throat. "Pump 2, please." The clerk slowly looked up. His face was pale, almost gray. Dark circles ringed his eyes. Without speaking, he pressed some buttons on the register. I slid my credit card and waited for the approval. The fluorescent lights hummed. Someone's coffee cup scraped against the counter. "Thanks," I said. But the clerk was already looking back at his paper. As I turned to leave, I noticed the other customers had shifted slightly away from me, like particles being repelled by a magnet. Back outside, I started pumping gas. The meter ticked up slowly. A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond the lights. I spun around, but saw only trees swaying in the wind. The hair on my neck stood up. The pump clicked off at 47 hours. 23. I got back in my car and turned the key. The engine coughed once, twice, then died. I tried again. Nothing, not even a click. Come on," I muttered, pumping the gas pedal. The engine remained silent. I popped the hood and got out, though I knew next to nothing about cars. Steam hissed from somewhere near the engine block. Even in the dim light, I could see fluid dripping onto the concrete. I went back inside. The clerk didn't look up this time. "Excuse me," I said. "My car won't start. Is there a mechanic around here, or maybe a tow truck?" He slowly shook his head, still not meeting my eyes. A phone I could use? My cell has no service. Another head shake. Look, I just need some help here. I can't. The woman in scrubs suddenly stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. She hurried out the door without looking back. The old man followed a moment later, practically running. I watched through the window as they got in their cars and peeled out of the parking lot, gravel spraying. What the hell is going on here? I demanded. The clerk finally looked at me. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated. You need to leave, he whispered. Now. Leave? My car won't start. How am I supposed to? Walk if you have to, but don't stay here after midnight. He looked at the clock on the wall. 11:47 p.m. What happens at midnight? He just shook his head and went back to his paper. I stood there for another minute, but it was clear I wouldn't get anything else out of him. Outside, the wind had picked up. The metal overhang creaked rhythmically. I tried the engine again, but nothing had changed. The hood was still warm when I checked the engine again. The leak seemed to be coming from a cracked hose, but I couldn't tell if it was coolant or oil. A twig snapped in the trees closer this time. I straightened up and peered into the darkness. The forest pressed in around the station like a wall of ink. Another crack, followed by a soft rustling. Was something moving out there? My flashlight beam caught only trees and undergrowth. But as I swept it back and forth, I noticed something odd. No insects chirping, no night birds, no small animals scurrying away from the light. The forest was completely silent. The wind died suddenly. In the quiet, I heard something that made my stomach clench. A low, wet sound, like someone slowly dragging meat across concrete. It seemed to come from just beyond the circle of light. I slammed the hood and got back in the car, locking the doors. The sound came again, closer. My hands shook as I tried the key one more time. The engine remained dead. Movement caught my eye. Something dark darted between the trees, just at the edge of visibility. Then again on the other side of the station. The shapes were too quick to make out clearly, but they seemed wrong somehow. Too fluid, too angular. 11:54 p.m. Through the windshield, I could see the clerk gathering his things. He kept glancing at the clock, movements jerky and rushed. As I watched, he killed the lights in the store and practically ran to an old pickup truck parked behind the building. The engine roared to life and he fishtailed onto the highway, heading east. I was alone. The dragging sound came from right behind the car now. Something scraped against the trunk. I kept my eyes straight ahead, afraid to look in the rearview mirror. More shapes flitted at the edges of my vision. The temperature seemed to drop. A hollow tapping started on the passenger window. Tap, tap, tap. My breath fogged the glass. I knew I shouldn't look, but I couldn't help myself. I turned my head slowly. Nothing was there. But as I watched, frost began spreading across the window in strange, angular patterns. The tapping moved to the back window, then the driver's side. It was toying with me. Midnight. The last fluorescent light above the pumps flickered and died. Darkness rushed in like water filling a sink. I fumbled for my flashlight, but the beam seemed weak and sickly now, barely penetrating the glass. Something massive moved in the trees. The shapes were getting bolder, staying visible longer. They flowed between the trunks like liquid shadow, but somehow sharp at the same time. My mind couldn't quite process what I was seeing. It was like trying to look at an optical illusion that kept shifting. A scraping sound from the roof. Heavy footsteps, but not human. The car rocked slightly. My chest felt tight. I couldn't get enough air. The shapes were definitely closer now, almost to the edge of the pavement. I could hear them moving, a sound like dry leaves sliding over stone. The thing on the roof shifted. A drop of something dark and viscous ran down the windshield. Another drop followed, then another. It had a metallic smell that made my nose burn. My flashlight beam caught it. The liquid was black but seemed to swirl with colors that shouldn't exist. A shadow fell across the windshield. Something was leaning down, trying to look in. I kept my eyes locked straight ahead, every muscle rigid. A soft, ticking sound, like claws on glass. Then a noise that might have been breathing but wasn't. My flashlight flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, I heard a sound like wet paper tearing. The car rocked again as the weight on the roof shifted, more scraping, moving toward the driver's side window. I could feel it getting closer, could sense its attention focusing on me like a physical pressure. Don't look, I thought. Whatever you do, don't look. But I could feel my head starting to turn, muscles moving against my will. Some part of me wanted to see, needed to see, even though I knew looking would destroy me. The window was right there. All I had to do was turn my head a few more inches. A truck horn blared, sudden and deafening. Headlights swept across the station. The weight vanished from the roof. Through the windshield, I saw the shapes retreat into the trees like smoke in reverse. A logging truck roared past on the highway, Jake brake thundering. In its wake, the station's fluorescent light sputtered back to life. My flashlight came back on. The temperature began to rise. I sat there shaking for several minutes. When I finally worked up the courage to try the engine again, it started on the first try. I didn't question it. I floored the accelerator and shot out onto the highway, heading west. The sun was rising by the time I pulled into the next town. At a diner, I asked the waitress about last stop gas. "Never heard of it," she said. "Only station out that way burned down 20 years ago. Killed the owner's whole family. Real tragedy." I drove back later that day, in full sunlight. I found the turnoff where the station had been, but there was nothing there, just crumbling concrete foundations half buried in weeds. As I stood there, a cold wind stirred the trees. Something dark moved just at the corner of my vision. I got back in my car and drove away. I've never driven that stretch of Route 12 again. Sometimes I wonder about the clerk if he makes that drive every night racing the darkness. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd turned my head those last few inches, if I'd looked directly at what was trying to look at me. But mostly I try not to wonder at all. Some questions are better left unanswered. Some roads are better left untraveled. And some stops should be the last stop indeed. In my dreams, I still hear that wet dragging sound. I still see those liquid shadows flowing between the trees. And sometimes, just as I'm waking up, I catch a whiff of that metallic smell and feel something cold and sharp watching me from just beyond the edge of vision. I keep my flashlight close now. I don't drive at night anymore. And I always make sure my gas tank is full. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I feel that same pull, that need to look, to see, to know. And I wonder if maybe that night at the station something looked back at me after all. Something that followed me home. Something that's still watching, still waiting, for the moment I finally give in and turn my head those last few inches. I think that's the worst part. Not knowing if I'm actually being watched or if the darkness that followed me home is all in my mind. But then I remember what I saw in those woods, what I felt on that terrible night, and I know it doesn't really matter. Some things are real whether we believe in them or not. Some darknesses don't need our permission to exist. So I keep my lights on. I check the locks twice. And I never ever look too long into the shadows at the edge of my vision, because I know now that some things look back, and once they notice you noticing them, they never really go away. I didn't mean to stay after sunset. That was my first mistake. The late October sun had already dipped behind the abandoned industrial buildings when I ducked under the rusty chain-link fence surrounding the old train depot. The security company's sign had weathered to illegibility years ago. No one had bothered replacing it. The depot sat at the edge of the old manufacturing district, a half-mile stretch of empty warehouses and crumbling loading docks. Most of the businesses moved out in the 90s when the railroad stopped running the spur line. Now it was just urban decay slowly being reclaimed by weeds and graffiti artists. I'd driven past this place hundreds of times, but never worked up the nerve to explore it. Today something just clicked. Maybe it was the unusually warm fall afternoon, or maybe I was just tired of playing it safe. Either way, I parked my car a few blocks away and walked over with my phone's flashlight and a bottle of water. Simple urban exploration. nothing I hadn't done before in other abandoned places. The main entrance was padlocked, but I found a personnel door around back with a broken handle. One solid push and I was inside. The air hit me first, stale and thick with decades of dust. My footsteps echoed off bare concrete walls as I clicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through darkness that felt almost solid. The front office area was stripped bare except for a few metal desks shoved against the walls. Layers of graffiti covered every surface, mostly typical tags and crude drawings. But something about the space felt wrong. The dust on the floor showed clear paths where people had walked recently. Not just teenage vandals either. These were purposeful tracks going deeper into the building. I followed the main corridor past rows of empty offices. Papers and trash littered the floor. Old invoices, shipping manifests, employee records. I picked up a time card from 1987. James Wilson, night shift supervisor. The paper felt fragile, like it might crumble in my hands. The corridor opened into the main depot floor, a cavernous space that disappeared into darkness overhead. My light barely reached the ceiling. Rust-streaked support columns marched into the gloom. The loading dock doors were still intact, sealed tight against the outside world. The tracks that once ran through the building had been pulled up, leaving only deep grooves in the concrete. That's when I found the first personal items. A worn leather wallet sat on a window ledge, covered in dust but obviously placed there deliberately. Inside, I found a driver's license from 1992, a few faded photos, and about $40 in old bills. Who leaves money behind like that? More items appeared as I went deeper. A child's backpack with school books still inside, a woman's purse with makeup and keys, a man's work boots carefully placed side by side. Each one looked like its owner had just set it down and walked away. The items got newer as I went along. Some couldn't have been there more than a few days. I should have left then. Every instinct told me to turn around and get out. But curiosity pushed me forward. I had to know why these things were here, who had left them. The back quarter of the depot housed the repair shops and storage areas. The doors were all closed except one that hung askew on broken hinges. My light showed more footprints in the dust, fresh ones leading inside. They didn't look quite right somehow. Too long, too widely spaced. I told myself they were just distorted by the uneven floor. The room beyond was cluttered with old equipment and tool cabinets. More personal items were arranged on the workbenches. Phones, watches, jewelry. A laptop that looked almost new sat open, its screen dark. The air felt different here, heavy with an odor I couldn't identify. Something metallic and organic at the same time. A scraping sound came from deeper in the shadows. I swung my light toward it but saw only shelving units and stacked crates. The sound came again, like something being dragged across concrete. My hands started shaking. The light beam wobbled. "Hello?" My voice sounded thin and weak. "Someone there?" No answer, but the scraping stopped. The silence felt expectant, like something was listening, waiting. I took a step backward and bumped into a workbench. Something clattered to the floor. A wrench, maybe. The sound echoed forever. When it finally faded, I heard breathing. Not my own ragged breaths, but something deeper, raspier. It came from the far corner where the shadows were thickest. I played my light across that corner slowly, dreading what I might see. The beam caught movement, something ducking behind a stack of crates, something tall. My mind refused to process the glimpse I got. The proportions were all wrong. I started backing toward the door, trying to move quietly. My foot hit something soft, a duffel bag that hadn't been there before. It was unzipped, spilling clothes onto the floor. The clothes were still warm. The breathing got louder. More scraping sounds now, coming from different directions. They were moving around me in the darkness. I ran. I don't remember making the conscious decision, but suddenly I was sprinting back through the depot. My phone's light bounced crazily off walls and support columns. The beam caught flickers of movement in my peripheral vision. Dark shapes ducking behind pillars, retreating into doorways. The sound of pursuit came from behind. Not footsteps exactly, but a weird scuttling noise that echoed off the high ceiling. I didn't look back. I focused on the exit ahead and ran faster than I've ever run in my life. Something brushed against my arm as I passed a column. The touch was cold and rough, like dried leather. I jerked away and almost fell. The scuttling got closer. I slammed through the broken door and out into twilight. The chain-link fence looked a mile high. I hit it at full speed and started climbing. Metal links bit into my hands. When I reached the top, I finally looked back. Shapes moved in the depot's shadows. Tall, angular forms that didn't move like anything I'd ever seen. One emerged partially into the fading daylight. I saw two long limbs oddly jointed, a head that wasn't shaped quite right. Then I was over the fence and running to my car. I drove home doing 80 the whole way. My hands shook so bad I could barely hold the steering wheel. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a long time with the engine running, trying to convince myself I hadn't seen what I thought I saw. That was 3 days ago. I haven't left my house since then. I keep checking the news, but there's nothing about the depot. No missing persons reports that match the IDs I found. No police investigations. Last night I woke up at 3 a.m. Something was scraping against my bedroom window. That same sound I heard in the depot. When I finally worked up the courage to look, I saw fresh scratches in the paint on the windowsill. They're still there this morning. I'm writing this all down because I need someone to know what happened. The scratching is back tonight, coming from multiple windows now. I think they followed me home. I think they've been waiting, watching. The sounds are getting louder, more insistent. They want me to open the windows. They want me to let them in. I'm going to upload this and then shut down my computer. The scratching is at my office door now. The handle is turning slowly. I shouldn't have taken those things from the depot. The wallet, the photos. They're sitting on my desk right now. I understand now why they were left there. They were offerings, payments. The door is opening. I hear the breathing again. That deep, raspy sound. They've come to collect what's theirs. I'm so sorry for disturbing your place. I'm sorry for taking what wasn't mine. Please just make it quick. I saw him again last night, standing right behind me in that damn mirror. I know what you're thinking. Just turn around, right? I've done that, hundreds of times now. But he's never there when I look. Only in the reflection, always watching, always waiting. It started 3 weeks ago when Sarah and I moved into the Montgomery house on Maple Street. The previous owner had died, and his kids just wanted to get rid of the place. We got it for a steal. Should have known better. But Sarah loved the Victorian architecture, and I couldn't say no to those bay windows and hardwood floors. Even that creepy attic seemed charming at first. I was up there alone that first Saturday, sorting through the previous owner's junk. The realtor said we could keep anything we found, and Sarah wanted me to check if there were any vintage pieces worth saving. The air was thick with dust, and the floorboards creaked with every step. Cardboard boxes and old furniture were scattered everywhere, covered in sheets that had turned gray with age. That's when I found it, leaning against the far wall behind a stack of moldy magazines. A full-length mirror in an ornate wooden frame, about 7 feet tall. The frame was dark oak, carved with intricate patterns I couldn't quite make out in the dim light from the small window. Despite years of neglect, the glass was perfectly clean, not a speck of dust on it. I remember thinking it would look great in our bedroom. Sarah loves antiques, and this piece looked expensive. I pulled it away from the wall, and that's when I saw my reflection. And him. He stood directly behind my right shoulder, tall, wearing a dark suit that looked like something from the 1940s. His face was pale, almost gray, and his eyes, I can still see those eyes. Black, empty, fixed on mine in the reflection. I spun around so fast I almost fell. Nothing. The attic was empty except for the junk and dust motes floating in the beam of sunlight from the window. My heart was pounding and sweat had soaked through my t-shirt. I turned back to the mirror. He was there again. Same position, same stare. I reached back, trying to touch where he should be standing. My hand swept through empty air. In the mirror, my hand passed right through his chest. but his expression never changed. I ran downstairs so fast I tripped on the last step and crashed into the hallway wall. Sarah found me there, shaking. "What happened? Are you okay?" She helped me up, checking for injuries. I told her everything. She went up to look at the mirror herself, but of course, when she looked, she only saw her own reflection. I sounded crazy. Hell, I felt crazy. "Maybe it was just the dust playing tricks with the light," she said. "Or you're tired from all the moving." I wanted to believe her. We brought the mirror down, Sarah insisted, and put it in our bedroom. That first night I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at it from the bed, but in the darkness, I could only make out vague shapes in its surface. The next morning, while getting dressed for work, I saw him again. This time he was closer, just inches behind me. I could see more details of his face: deep-set eyes, hollow cheeks, thin, colorless lips pressed into a tight line. He looked starved, but not exactly skeletal, more like someone who had been sick for a very long time. I stopped using that mirror, started getting dressed in the bathroom instead, but I'd catch glimpses whenever I walked past our bedroom. He was always there, waiting, and always a little closer. Sarah started to worry. She caught me avoiding the bedroom, taking the long way through the house to get to the bathroom. I was sleeping on the couch most nights, claiming backache from moving furniture. "We need to talk about this," she said over dinner last week. "You're not sleeping. You look terrible. Maybe we should see someone." "A psychiatrist?" "I'm not crazy, Sarah. He's there. Every time I look in that mirror, he's there." "Then let's get rid of it." We tried. I wrapped it in blankets and drove it to the dump. Paid extra to watch them throw it in the crusher. Felt a weight lift off my chest as the glass shattered. The next morning, the mirror was back in our bedroom. Frame pristine, glass perfect. Sarah screamed when she saw it. She believed me then. We tried again. This time we took it to the edge of town and smashed it ourselves with a sledgehammer. Every shard showed his face, multiplied dozens of times, all staring at me. We left the pieces scattered in the woods. When we got home, the mirror was waiting. After that, Sarah started sleeping at her sister's place. I'm alone in the house now, haven't slept in days. The mirror, it's changing. Last night I walked past the bedroom and saw him step closer to my reflection. His hand reached out, almost touching my shoulder in the glass. I felt cold, so cold my teeth chattered. This morning my reflection looked pale, thin, sick, like him. In the mirror, he stands directly behind me now, his chest pressed against my back. I can't feel him, but in the reflection I see his hands resting on my shoulders. His lips move, but I hear nothing. I'm writing this because I need someone to know what happened. My phone is dead, won't turn on or charge. The power is out in the house, though I can see lights on in the neighbors' windows. The front door won't open. Neither will the windows. The mirror is the only thing that seems to glow in the darkness. I can see him beckoning to me from its surface. My reflection grows fainter every hour. Soon I think I'll disappear completely and he'll step out into my place. If you're reading this, don't come looking for me. But if you happen to buy this house and you find a mirror in the attic, don't look into it. Don't even touch it. Just run. I have to go now. He's calling me. In the mirror, I can finally hear his voice, dry as dead leaves. Your turn to wait. I wasn't supposed to be at the Jefferson Theater that night. My job was just to assess the building's structural integrity for the demolition company. But what happened in those dark hours changed everything I thought I knew about reality. The front doors creaked when I pushed them open at 7:15 p.m. My flashlight beam cut through decades of dust hanging in the air. The lobby smelled like mold and rotting carpet. Water damage had turned the ceiling into a mess of brown stains and peeling paint. I checked my phone. No signal inside these thick walls. Standard procedure said I should wait for my partner Dave, but he was already 20 minutes late. The demolition was scheduled for next week. I needed these initial readings tonight. The beam of my flashlight revealed torn movie posters from the 1950s still clinging to the walls. My boots left prints in the dust as I walked toward the main theater entrance. A candy wrapper crackled under my foot. The sound echoed through the empty building. The double doors to the theater itself were warped, probably from moisture. I had to lean my shoulder into them to force them open. The hinges screamed like they hadn't moved in years. When I stepped through, the musty air got thicker. My light swept across rows of decaying seats. Red velvet upholstery hung in tatters, exposing rusted springs and rotting foam padding. The air felt colder here than in the lobby. I pulled my jacket tighter and checked the temperature gauge on my tablet. 50 degrees Celsius. I noted it in my report. The beam caught something moving near the stage. Probably a rat. I'd seen plenty in buildings like this. I started down the center aisle, testing each step. The floor felt solid enough, but water damage could hide structural weaknesses. That's when I heard it. Applause. Not recorded or echoing, immediate and alive. It came from the stage area, along with murmuring voices. My flashlight beam jerked up toward the sound. Nothing. Just the empty stage with its tattered curtain. The clapping stopped as suddenly as it had started. My heart pounded against my ribs. Sweat broke out on my forehead despite the cold. "Hello?" My voice cracked. The word bounced off the walls and came back to me. No response. I should have left. Should have waited for Dave. Instead, I walked closer to the stage. The applause started again, louder this time. Distinct voices muttered and laughed just beyond the curtain. I heard footsteps moving across wooden boards. "This isn't funny," I shouted. "Anyone there?" The sounds continued. My hands shook as I swept the flashlight beam across the stage. The curtain rippled slightly, like someone had just brushed past it. I climbed the side stairs to the stage. They groaned under my weight. At the top, I stood perfectly still, listening. The voices seemed clearer now. I could almost make out words. "Show yourself," I said. My voice sounded thin and weak. The applause grew louder. It seemed to come from the empty seats behind me. I spun around, light beam cutting through darkness. Nothing moved in the theater below. When I turned back, the curtain started closing. Not falling or dropping, sliding smoothly across the stage like it was being pulled by invisible hands. The ancient mechanism shouldn't have even worked anymore. I stumbled backward. My heel caught on something. I fell hard, my flashlight clattering away. It rolled to a stop, beam pointing at the ceiling. Complete silence fell. No applause. No voices. No sound of the curtain moving. Just my own ragged breathing and pulse thundering in my ears. I scrambled for the flashlight. My hands trembled as I grabbed it. When I pointed it at the stage, the curtain was fully closed. It hung perfectly still. My legs felt weak as I stood. The silence pressed against my eardrums. I swept the light across the stage, looking for any movement, any sign of who or what had pulled that curtain. A floorboard creaked behind the curtain. My body went rigid. Fight or flight instincts screamed at me to run, but I needed to know. I took one step toward the curtain, another. My free hand reached out to grab the heavy fabric. I yanked it back. The beam illuminated empty space. No people, no machinery, just bare wooden boards and scattered props covered in decades of dust. Something cold brushed against the back of my neck. I spun around, heart nearly stopping, nothing there. But the temperature had dropped. I could see my breath now. The gauge on my tablet read 38 degrees. More footsteps sounded behind me. I turned again. Still nothing visible. But the footsteps continued, circling me. The beam of my flashlight caught puffs of disturbed dust rising from the floor where the steps fell. I backed toward the stage stairs. The footsteps followed. My heel hit empty air. I'd reached the edge. I grabbed the railing to steady myself. The temperature plunged lower. Frost crystallized on the flashlight's metal casing. The beam dimmed, flickered. I nearly fell down the stairs in my rush to escape. My feet tangled and I slid down several steps, catching myself on the railing. Pain shot through my palms where they scraped against rusted metal. The footsteps rushed toward me. I could hear them pounding on the stairs. I ran down the center aisle, not daring to look back. The flashlight beam bounced wildly, throwing twisted shadows across the walls. Something grabbed my jacket. I yanked free, hearing fabric tear. Cold air wrapped around me like fingers. The voices returned, dozens of them now, laughing and whispering just behind me. I slammed into the theater doors at full speed. They burst open and I stumbled into the lobby. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck in the parking lot. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys twice before managing to unlock the door. I threw myself inside and locked all the doors. The engine roared to life. I reversed out of the parking spot so fast the tires squealed. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Light blazed from every window of the theater, though the power had been cut off years ago. Shadows moved behind the glass. Then all the lights went out at once, plunging the building back into darkness. I drove straight to the nearest bar and ordered 2 shots of whiskey. My hands still trembled as I pulled out my phone to call Dave. He answered on the first ring. "Where were you?" I demanded. "Sorry, man. Got caught in traffic. I'm almost to the theater now. Don't go in there. Meet me at O'Malley's bar on 4th Street. You need to hear what just happened." "Everything okay? You sound weird." "Just meet me here. You're not going to believe this." I hung up and ordered another shot. My jacket was torn where something had grabbed it. The gauge on my tablet was frozen, stuck at 30 sous de gramme. And my flashlight, a heavy-duty model rated for 12 hours of continuous use, was dead. Dave arrived 20 minutes later. I told him everything while he drank his beer and stared at me like I'd lost my mind. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "So what do we do?" he finally asked. "We tell the company we need another week to complete the assessment. Make up some excuse about structural issues. I need time to go back during daylight, bring better equipment, document everything." "You want to go back? After what happened?" I nodded. The whiskey had steadied my nerves, but my hands still felt cold. "Whatever's in there, it doesn't want that building torn down. We need to find out why." Dave shook his head. "You're crazy, but I'm not letting you go alone." We spent the next day gathering equipment, high-powered lights, infrared cameras, digital audio recorders, more sensitive temperature gauges. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those footsteps circling me on the stage. The next morning, we pulled into the theater parking lot at 8 a.m. sharp. Sunlight didn't make the building look any less menacing. Dark windows stared down at us like empty eyes. "Ready?" Dave asked. His face was pale. I checked the batteries in our equipment one last time. "Let's find out what doesn't want this place torn down." We walked toward the entrance. A cool breeze swept through the parking lot, carrying the faint sound of applause. The front doors stood open, waiting for us. I stopped there. More footsteps sounded from inside, along with muffled voices and laughter. The curtain on the main stage would be closing now, plunging everything into silence. Then the real performance would begin. Dave grabbed my arm. "We don't have to do this." But we did. Something waited in that darkness. Something that had been waiting a very long time. And I needed to know what it was. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped through the doors. The beam cut through swirling dust, illuminating the path to the theater entrance. More applause echoed from inside, louder now, welcoming us to the show. The temperature dropped with each step we took. Our breath fogged in the air. The tablet's gauge began to fall. Behind us, the front doors swung shut with a thunderous boom. The performance was about to begin again. This time I intended to stay for the entire show, no matter what appeared on that stage when the curtain finally opened. The voices grew louder as we approached the theater doors. They seemed to be waiting for us, waiting to reveal what happened in this place all those years ago and why some performances refuse to end even after the audience has gone home and the stage has gone dark. I reached for the handle. The metal felt like ice against my skin. Beyond the doors, footsteps crossed the stage, and something waited in the shadows behind that heavy curtain. Something that had called us here to witness its final act. I pulled the door open. Darkness rushed out to meet us like a living thing. The beam of my flashlight caught movement on the stage, just for a moment before the curtain began to close. Dave's hand tightened on my arm. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. I took a deep breath of cold air. Time to find out what kind of show they're putting on. We stepped into the theater. The doors swung shut behind us with a sound like a coffin lid closing. Ahead, the stage waited in darkness. Another performance was about to begin, and this time, we had front row seats. I shouldn't have gone into that house. That's what everyone says after something goes wrong, right? But I really shouldn't have. The local kids called it the Preston House. It sat empty for 15 years after the family disappeared. Not died, disappeared. The police found their cars in the driveway, their clothes in the closets, and their dinner still warm on the table. They just vanished. I'm a real estate photographer. That's what brought me there on that cold October morning. The bank finally seized the property and wanted photos for the listing. Simple job. Get in, shoot the rooms, get out. 3 hours tops. The front door creaked when I pushed it open. Dead leaves had blown into the foyer, crunching under my boots. The air felt thick and stale. Dust particles floated in the beams of sunlight coming through the grimy windows. Standard abandoned house stuff. I pulled out my camera and started with the entryway. Click. The grand staircase. Click. The formal living room with its sheet-covered furniture. Click. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors as I moved from room to room. Then I heard it. Tiny footsteps, like a mouse scurrying across a floor. But they came from above me. I froze, listening. Nothing. Must be settling noises. Old houses make weird sounds. The kitchen was huge, with an island bigger than my apartment's bathroom. While I lined up a shot of the industrial stove, the footsteps came again. Tap, tap, tap. Definitely from upstairs, probably squirrels in the attic. I headed up to the second floor. More dust, more sheets, more silence. The master bedroom took up half the floor. Walking in, I noticed a door in the corner, not quite a closet, too small. I opened it. Inside sat a dollhouse, not some plastic Barbie dream house, but a perfect miniature of the Preston house. Every detail matched. The wraparound porch, the dormer windows, even the weather vane on top. It stood about 4 feet tall with tiny furniture visible through the windows. I knelt down to look closer. The craftsmanship was incredible. Each room was an exact copy of the real house, down to the wallpaper patterns. The furniture matched too. I could see the same covered shapes in the dollhouse living room as the full-size one downstairs. Then my blood went cold. In the miniature foyer, I saw tiny leaves scattered across the floor, just like the ones I'd walked through earlier. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came from inside the dollhouse. I pressed my ear against the tiny front wall. More footsteps moving from room to room, following the path I'd just taken. I backed away. This wasn't possible. I needed air. I turned to leave and knocked my camera bag over. As I bent to pick it up, movement caught my eye. Through the dollhouse windows, I saw something small and dark dart past. My hands shook as I grabbed my bag. I had to get out of there. But curiosity gripped me. I had to know what was in that dollhouse. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. Leaning in close, I peered through the windows. The beam illuminated each tiny room. Empty. 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 Wait. There. In the kitchen. A figure about 2 inches tall stood by the miniature island. It looked like a person, but wrong somehow. Too angular. Its head turned toward me. I stumbled backward, hitting the real bedroom wall. The figure disappeared into the dollhouse shadows. More footsteps above me now, coming from the attic. I looked up at the ceiling, then back at the dollhouse. Its tiny attic window was dark. My heart pounded. I needed photos of the 3rd floor to complete the job. But those footsteps? I could leave now, tell the bank I got enough shots. But I knew I'd wonder forever what was up there. I found the attic stairs behind a door in the hallway. They creaked with each step. The attic was one huge room, dusty and dim. Light filtered through cobwebbed windows. Boxes and old furniture created shadows everywhere. The footsteps started again. In the dollhouse 2 floors below. Tap, tap, tap. moving up its tiny stairs. I heard a scratching sound behind me. Spinning around, I saw nothing but shapes in the darkness. The scratching came again, from a different corner, then another. The sounds circled me. I ran for the stairs. Halfway down, I heard a small thud from the dollhouse. Then another, and another, like something climbing down its miniature steps. I sprinted through the second floor, taking the main stairs 2 at a time. More thuds from the dollhouse, getting faster, racing me. I reached the foyer. The front door was closed. I hadn't closed it. I grabbed the handle, locked. I rattled it hard. The door wouldn't budge. Tap, tap, tap. The dollhouse footsteps reached its ground floor. Something moved in my peripheral vision. A shadow darting between the sheet-covered furniture. Another by the stairs. More shadows joined them, closing in. I backed against the door. The shadows crept closer. They were about 2 inches tall. My phone rang, making me jump. I fumbled it out of my pocket. My boss. "Where are those Preston House photos? Bank's waiting." The shadows stopped moving. "I'm still working on them," I said, my voice shaking. "Everything okay? You sound weird." The shadows retreated a few inches. "Yeah, just taking longer than expected. Reception's bad in here. I'll call you back." I ended the call. The shadows surged forward. I kicked the door hard. The lock broke. I bolted outside, ran to my car, and drove away. I didn't stop until I was home. I never sent those photos to the bank, never went back to that house. But sometimes, late at night, I hear tiny footsteps in my walls. Tap, 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 getting closer. The next morning, I checked the news. The Preston house had burned down overnight. Total loss. The fire department found no cause. But I know what happened. They got tired of waiting in that dollhouse. They wanted out. Now they're free. I've started noticing small shadows in my apartment, just glimpses. And yesterday I found something in my closet, a dollhouse, an exact miniature of my building. I'm packing my bags now, moving far away, but I know it won't matter. They'll find me. They always find me. The footsteps are coming from inside the walls again, but they don't sound so tiny anymore. They're getting bigger, closer. They're almost here. The thing about night buses is that they're never on time. I know this because I've spent too many hours waiting for them. But what happened last Tuesday made all my previous bad experiences seem like pleasant memories. I work late shifts at the warehouse on the outskirts of town, and that night was particularly cold for October. The digital display at bus stop 43 showed 11:47 p.m. when I first noticed him. Just a shape, really, sitting on a bench 3 stops down, illuminated by a flickering streetlight. The distance between stops is about 200 yards each, so I could make out only basic details. A figure in dark clothes, hunched forward, completely still. My phone was at 12% battery, and I'd already killed time by scrolling through every social media app twice. The schedule said the 72 bus should arrive at 11:50 p.m. I stamped my feet against the cold and rubbed my hands together, creating a harsh sound that seemed too loud in the empty street. When I looked up again, something about the distant figure caught my attention. The streetlight above him cast weird shadows, but I could see he wore some kind of long coat or robe that covered most of his body. His stillness bothered me. Most people waiting for buses check their phones, look around, or at least move occasionally. This person sat like a statue. The bus finally arrived at 12:03 a.m. Its brakes squealed as it pulled up to my stop, the doors opening with a hydraulic hiss. I climbed aboard, nodded to the driver, and swiped my transit card. As I walked to my usual spot in the middle of the bus, I glanced out the window at the figure 3 stops ahead. He hadn't moved. The bus drove on. I watched through the window as we approached the next stop. My heart rate picked up when I saw another figure sitting on the bench. Same posture. Same dark clothes covering the whole body. Same absolute stillness. "Hey," I called out to the driver, my voice cracking slightly. Did you see someone sitting at the last stop? The driver didn't respond. Maybe he couldn't hear me over the engine noise. We passed the second figure. I pressed my face against the cold window, trying to get a better look. It was impossible to make out any features in the darkness, but the shape and posture were identical to the first one I'd seen. My hands felt clammy. I wiped them on my jeans and took deep breaths, telling myself I was being paranoid. Plenty of people wear dark clothes. Plenty of people sit still while waiting for buses. But when we approached the third stop, I knew what I'd see before we got there. Another figure, same position, same clothes. This time I got up and walked to the front of the bus. "Excuse me," I said louder. "Are you seeing this? The person at each stop?" The driver kept his eyes on the road. The radio played soft static. I wasn't even sure if he'd heard me. I sat back down, my legs shaking slightly. We were getting closer to my stop, number 47. 4 more to go. I pulled out my phone to call my girlfriend, but the battery had died. The next stop was empty. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. But at the stop after that, there he was again. Or it was again. Or they were again. I couldn't tell anymore. When we reached my stop, I almost didn't get off. The thought of walking the 2 blocks to my apartment made my stomach turn. But I couldn't just ride the bus all night. I needed to get home, get inside, lock the doors, and try to make sense of what I'd seen. I pressed the stop request button. The bus slowed and I walked to the exit, my legs feeling wooden. As I stepped down onto the sidewalk, I forced myself not to look back at the previous stops. The bus pulled away, leaving me alone in the yellow cone of a street light. My apartment building was just ahead, past the 24-hour convenience store and the closed laundromat. I walked quickly, my footsteps echoing off the buildings. The street was empty except for a stray cat that darted across my path, making me jump. I fumbled with my keys at the building's entrance, dropping them once before managing to get the door open. The fluorescent lights in the lobby buzzed as I waited for the elevator. When it arrived, I pressed the button for the 4th floor repeatedly until the doors closed. My apartment was at the end of the hall. I locked the door behind me, then checked that I'd locked it, then checked again. The familiar surroundings helped calm my nerves slightly. I turned on all the lights and went through my normal routine, hung up my jacket, kicked off my shoes, grabbed a beer from the fridge. I didn't want to look out the window. I really didn't. But something pulled me toward it the same way your tongue is drawn to a sore tooth. My living room window faces the street. I stood to the side of it, hidden by the curtain, and slowly peered out. At first I saw nothing unusual, just the empty street, the closed shops, the streetlights casting pools of yellow light on the sidewalk. Then I noticed movement near the bus stop, where I'd gotten off. A figure stepped into the light. Dark clothes that covered everything except the face. But I couldn't see a face. Where a face should have been, there was only shadow. It turned toward my building, toward my window. I yanked the curtain closed and backed away. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. After a few seconds, I forced myself to look again. The figure stood directly under the street light now, completely still, oriented toward my window. I couldn't tell if it was looking at me because I still couldn't see a face, but I felt its attention like a physical weight. I closed the curtain again and sat on my couch, trying to control my breathing. My phone was dead, and my landline had been disconnected months ago because who needs a landline anymore? I considered going to a neighbor's apartment, but the thought of stepping into the hallway terrified me. An hour passed. I checked the window every few minutes. The figure remained in the same spot, same position, same orientation toward my window. At 2 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. Slow, heavy steps that stopped right at my door. I sat perfectly still, hardly breathing, as a shadow blocked the light coming under my door. The doorknob rattled, once, twice, then silence. I waited, straining my ears for any sound. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I heard the footsteps again, moving away down the hall. When I checked the window next, the figure was gone. But as I scanned the street, I spotted it standing in a different position, closer to my building. And now I could see another one emerging from the shadows between two buildings. And another, crossing the street with slow, deliberate steps. They all wore the same dark clothes. They all moved with the same unnatural stillness, and they were all oriented toward my window. I spent the rest of the night on my couch, alternating between watching the figures through a crack in the curtains and listening for sounds in the hallway. Sometimes I heard footsteps. Sometimes I heard what might have been whispers. Sometimes I heard nothing at all, which was worse. The figures outside kept moving, but always maintaining their focus on my window. By 4 a.m., I counted 7 of them. By 5 a.m., there were 12. When dawn finally came, they vanished. Not gradually or one by one, between one blink and the next, they were simply gone. The street was empty except for early morning commuters waiting for their buses. I called in sick to work, spent the day sleeping in short, restless bursts, jumping at every sound. When evening approached, I knew I couldn't stay in my apartment another night. I packed a bag and took a taxi to my girlfriend's place across town. She listened to my story with growing concern, then insisted I stay with her for a few days. I agreed, grateful for the company and the change of location. We ordered takeout, watched movies, and for a while I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. But around midnight, I glanced out her living room window. 3 figures stood on the street below, their dark clothes rippling slightly in the wind. As I watched, they all turned their faceless heads toward me in perfect unison. I haven't gone home since then, haven't taken a bus either. My girlfriend drives me everywhere now, and I've been looking for a new apartment in a different part of town. But sometimes when I'm alone, I hear footsteps behind me. And every night, no matter where I am, if I look out a window after midnight, they're there, waiting, watching, standing perfectly still in their dark clothes. I don't know what they want. I don't know why they chose me. All I know is that they're patient and they're spreading. Last night I counted 23 of them. Tonight I'm writing this from a motel room 50 miles from the city. I've kept the curtains closed, but I can feel them out there. Sometimes I hear movement outside my door. Sometimes I see shadows pass under it. And I know that if I open the curtains, even just a crack, they'll be there. Standing in the parking lot, looking up at my window, waiting. The thing about night buses is that they're never on time. But maybe that's not the worst thing about them. Maybe the worst thing is who, or what, you might see waiting at those lonely stops between midnight and dawn. I should know. I see them every night now, whether I'm near a bus stop or not. And I know with a certainty that chills me to my core that someday soon, they're going to do more than just watch. The footsteps outside my door are getting closer. My hands are still shaking as I type this. I need to write down what happened 3 nights ago at Blackwood State Forest. Maybe someone will find this and make sense of it. Maybe someone will tell me I'm not crazy. I smelled the smoke before I opened my eyes. The campfire had died down to embers, barely giving off any heat in the cold October air. My watch showed 2:47 a.m. The nylon walls of my tent rippled in the breeze. Everything was quiet except for the occasional crack of a branch in the darkness. Then I heard it, a voice, clear as day, coming from somewhere in the trees. Hello? Is anyone there? I sat up, fully awake now. The voice was male, probably middle-aged, with a slight tremor that made it sound uncertain. It came again, this time from a different direction. Can somebody help me? I'm lost. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating patches of underbrush and tree trunks. Nothing moved. No signs of another person. Hello? I called back. Where are you? Silence. Just the wind in the branches. I pulled on my boots and jacket, clicked on my headlamp, and stepped out of the tent. The ground was damp under my feet, covered in a thick carpet of fallen leaves. The voice came again, farther away this time. Please. I can't find my way back. I hesitated. Every horror movie I'd ever seen told me to stay put. But what if someone really was lost out there? The temperature was dropping fast. A person could die of exposure on a night like this. "Keep talking," I shouted. "I'm coming to help." I grabbed my backpack with some basic supplies: water, protein bars, first aid kit, spare batteries. The beam of my headlamp swung back and forth as I walked toward where I'd last heard the voice. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching overhead like gnarled fingers. "Hello?" The voice was fainter now, deeper in the forest. "Is someone there?" I picked up my pace, pushing through patches of thorny undergrowth. The voice kept moving, always just ahead, always just out of sight. After about 10 minutes of walking, I stopped to get my bearings. Something wasn't right. The trees around me looked different. The trunks were older, wider, covered in thick black bark that I hadn't seen before. The branches grew at odd angles, creating natural archways between them. It was like walking through a series of doorways. I turned around to head back to camp. But the path I'd taken was gone, replaced by more of those strange tree corridors. My heart started beating faster. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS. No signal. "This way," the voice whispered, closer now. It came from one of the corridors to my left. "Who are you?" I demanded. My voice cracked. "Show yourself." Nothing. Just more whispers, drifting between the trees like smoke. I picked a direction and started walking, trying to keep track of my route. Left turn, right turn, straight ahead through a gap between two massive oaks. The corridor seemed to go on forever, twisting and branching like some kind of maze. After 20 minutes, I saw something familiar, the same two oaks I'd passed earlier, their branches still forming that distinctive archway. That was impossible. I'd been walking in a straight line. My hands were sweating now. I wiped them on my jeans and checked my watch. 3:22 a.m. The temperature had dropped even further. My breath came out in white clouds. Getting closer. The voice echoed from somewhere ahead. It sounded different now, less human, more like branches scraping together in the wind. I tried another direction. Right turn, left turn, straight ahead. The corridors kept shifting, the trees bending and swaying even though there was no wind. My headlamp beam caught flickers of movement in the corners of my vision, but every time I turned to look, there was nothing there. The ground sloped downward. The leaf litter grew deeper, making each step uncertain. I stumbled and caught myself against a tree trunk. The bark felt wrong under my fingers, too soft, almost like skin. I jerked my hand away and kept moving. The voice was all around me now, coming from every direction at once. Sometimes it sounded like my own voice, sometimes like a stranger's, sometimes like nothing human at all. 3:45 a.m., back at the two oaks again. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. The corridors seemed to pulse with their own rhythm, the branches overhead weaving tighter together until barely any moonlight filtered through. I started running. The beam of my headlamp bounced wildly as I crashed through the maze of trees. Left, right, straight ahead, right again. The voice laughed, the sound echoing off the trunks like it was coming from inside them. My foot caught on an exposed root, and I went down hard. The flashlight flew from my hand and shattered against a rock. The forest plunged into darkness except for my failing headlamp. I lay there in the leaves, gasping for breath. When I rolled over, I saw them, faces in the bark of the trees, dozens of them, twisted and distorted, their mouths moving in silent screams. I scrambled backward until I hit another trunk. More faces. They were everywhere. "Welcome home," the voice whispered, right next to my ear. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I ran without direction or purpose, just trying to get away from those faces, from that voice, from whatever this place had become. 4:12 a.m., the two oaks again. I collapsed against a trunk, not caring about the faces anymore. My headlamp flickered and died. The darkness pressed in like a physical weight. Time became meaningless. I wandered through the corridors in total darkness, trailing my hands along the bark to guide myself. Sometimes I felt the faces shift and move under my fingers. Sometimes I heard whispers in languages I didn't understand. Sometimes I heard my own voice calling for help from far away. The sky began to lighten. Dawn was coming. The first gray light filtered through the branches, revealing the maze of corridors stretching endlessly in every direction. The faces were gone from the bark, but I could still feel them watching. I sat down and waited for full daylight. The voice had stopped. The trees stood motionless, their branches no longer weaving together overhead. They looked normal again, just trees in a forest. My watch read 6:35 a.m. when I heard new voices, human voices, calling my name. Search and rescue. They found me sitting under those 2 oak trees less than 50 yards from my campsite. I'd been walking in circles all night, they said. It happens to people sometimes in the dark. The mind plays tricks. They helped me pack up my tent. They gave me water and checked me for injuries. They were kind and professional and didn't comment on my wild eyes or trembling hands. They explained about spatial disorientation, about how easy it is to get turned around in the woods at night. I nodded and thanked them and promised to be more careful next time. I didn't tell them about the voice or the faces in the trees or the corridors that kept leading back to the same place. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. But I know what I experienced. I know what I saw and heard and felt. And I know that something in those woods was trying to keep me there. Something that's still waiting, still whispering, still calling people deeper into its maze of living corridors. I'm writing this from my apartment in the city, as far from any forest as I can get. But every night I dream about those twisted trees. I dream about the faces in the bark. And sometimes when it's very quiet, I hear that voice again. Come back. You're getting closer. I wake up in a cold sweat, checking the walls for faces, listening for whispers in the dark. And I know, deep in my bones, that whatever I encountered in those woods is still there, still waiting, still calling people into its endless maze of trees. The search and rescue team filed their report. They marked it as a simple case of a hiker getting disoriented at night. Nothing unusual. Nothing supernatural. Just another person who wandered off trail and needed help finding their way back. But they didn't see what I saw. They didn't hear what I heard. They don't wake up every night at 2:47 a.m., heart racing, certain that something followed them home from those woods. I've researched the history of Blackwood State Forest since that night. There are other stories. Hikers who disappeared and were found days later with no memory of where they'd been. Campers who reported hearing voices in the trees. Search parties who got turned around and ended up back where they started no matter which direction they walked. The local indigenous peoples called it the wandering place. They said the trees there had a hunger for human souls. They said once the forest chose you, it would never let you go completely. Their legends warn about voices in the darkness, about paths that lead nowhere, about faces watching from the bark of ancient trees. I believe them now. I believe every word. I haven't been camping since that night. I avoid parks and wooded areas. I take the long way around if my route would take me past a dense stand of trees. Some might call it paranoia. I call it survival. Because I know the truth now. I know what lurks in the darkness between the trees. I know about the maze that exists just out of sight, waiting for people to wander in. I know about the voices that call you deeper and deeper until you can't find your way back. And sometimes on nights when the wind blows just right, I hear branches scraping against my window. I hear whispers in the darkness. I hear that voice, still calling, still trying to lead me back to those 2 oak trees in the endless corridors beyond. But I won't go back. I can't go back. Because I know now that I didn't escape that night. I was released. And next time, the forest won't let me go so easily. So I stay in the city, surrounded by concrete and steel. I keep the blinds drawn at night. I try not to think about what's waiting in those woods, but I know it's still there, still watching, still hungry. And somewhere in Blackwood State Forest, in a maze of twisted trees and endless corridors, something is waiting, waiting and whispering, waiting for the next person to hear its call, waiting to welcome them home, just like it almost welcomed me. The figure on the bridge shouldn't have been there at 3:47 a.m. That's my first clear thought when I remember what happened. Everything else from that night is a blur of adrenaline and fear, but I remember checking my dashboard clock the moment I first saw it. 3:47 a.m. Standing dead center on Miller's Bridge, right in my lane. I was driving home from my late shift at the paper mill in Augusta, taking the back roads like I always did. The main highway was under construction, and I'd found this route 6 months ago. 40 minutes of pitch-black country roads, but it saved me 20 minutes of stop-and-go traffic. Worth it, I'd always thought. Not anymore. The roads were empty that night. They always were. That's why I liked them. Just me, my old Honda Civic, and miles of asphalt cutting through dense Maine forest. The radio was off, burned out 2 weeks ago, and I hadn't bothered to fix it. The only sound was my engine and the hum of tires on pavement. Miller's Bridge came up exactly where it always did, spanning a deep gorge over the Kennebec River. It's one of those old steel truss bridges, the kind that makes your tires rumble when you cross it. Single lane each way with metal guardrails that have seen better days. The bridge is about 200 feet long, and that night, the fog had settled in thick around it. My headlights cut through the moisture, creating a tunnel of light. That's when I saw it. A person standing perfectly still in the middle of my lane. Just standing there, facing away from me. Dark clothes. Couldn't tell if it was a man or woman. My first instinct was to hit the brakes, and I did, hard. The ABS kicked in, making the pedal pulse under my foot. "Hey!" I shouted through my closed windows like they could hear me. The figure didn't move, didn't turn, just stood there, maybe 50 feet ahead now. I laid on the horn. The sound echoed off the bridge's metal frame, bouncing back at me. The figure remained motionless. My car had slowed to about 15 mph, and I was closing in. 30 feet now. That's when my headlights caught something wrong. The figure's feet. They weren't touching the ground. It was hovering maybe an inch above the pavement. My brain rejected this information. People don't hover. My hands gripped the steering wheel harder, knuckles white. 20 feet. I could see more details now. The clothes were old, like something from the 1950s. A dark suit, but worn and dirty. The hair was matted and gray, 10 feet. My car had slowed to a crawl. I couldn't stop completely. Every instinct screamed not to stop on this bridge. Not with that thing in front of me. 5 feet. I had to steer around it. There was enough room, barely. I turned the wheel slightly left, giving the figure a wide berth. As I passed, the air in my car went cold. Not gradually, but instantly. Like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over me. My breath came out in visible puffs. The figure disappeared. Not like a person stepping aside or running away. It simply ceased to exist between one blink and the next. I hit the gas, wanting to get off this bridge as fast as possible. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. That's when I made my mistake. I looked in the rearview mirror. The figure was in my back seat. I screamed. My foot slammed the gas pedal to the floor. The car lurched forward, engine whining. In the mirror, I could see its face now. Gray skin pulled tight over bones. Black holes where eyes should be. Its mouth was open in a silent scream, showing teeth that were too long, too sharp. I didn't dare look directly behind me. Kept my eyes on the road, hands locked on the wheel, speeding through the fog. The temperature dropped lower. Ice crystals formed on my windshield. My teeth chattered uncontrollably. The presence behind me felt heavy, like gravity had increased tenfold. The back of my neck tingled. Every hair on my body stood on end. I could hear breathing that wasn't mine. Wet, ragged breaths that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I pushed my Honda to 90, then 100 mph. The engine protested, but I didn't care. The road ahead was a blur. Trees whipped past in my peripheral vision. All I could think was, get home, get home, get home. A hand touched my shoulder. Cold penetrated through my jacket, through my skin, straight to the bone. I jerked away, the car swerving. The guardrail appeared in my headlights, too close. I yanked the wheel back, overcorrected. The back end fishtailed. The breathing got louder. Something grabbed the back of my seat. I felt fingers, too long, too thin, brush against my neck. The car's electrical system went haywire. Headlights flickering, dashboard lights blinking randomly. The engine sputtered. No, no, no. I pounded the steering wheel. The engine caught again, but the car was moving slower now. 80 mph, 70, 60, like something was dragging behind us, creating resistance. The thing in my back seat moved. In my mirror, I saw its face getting closer to mine, those black eye sockets fixed on my reflection. Its mouth opened wider, impossibly wide. The jaw distended like a snake's. The teeth, God, the teeth, there were rows of them, like a shark's. I didn't think. I slammed on the brakes and yanked the emergency brake at the same time. The car went into a spin. The world outside became a carousel of trees and fog. I felt the back end lift off the ground. We were going to roll. Then everything stopped. The car settled back on all four wheels, facing the wrong direction on the empty road. The engine died. Silence fell. I sat there, hands still death-gripping the wheel, breathing hard. Cold sweat ran down my face. Slowly, carefully, I looked in the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I tried to start the car. The engine turned over on the third try. I did a 3-point turn and drove the rest of the way home at exactly 35 mph, jumping at every shadow. I called in sick the next day, and the next. When I finally went back to work, I took the highway. An extra 20 minutes of traffic was nothing compared to what waited on those back roads. But here's the thing. Here's why I'm writing this down. Last night I was getting ready for bed, brushing my teeth, going through my normal routine. I looked up at the bathroom mirror to check for toothpaste on my face. There was something behind me. Just for a second. A dark suit, gray skin, black holes for eyes. I'm writing this at a truck stop diner off I-95. I've been here for 6 hours drinking coffee that tastes like battery acid. The sun is up now. I'm safe in the daylight, surrounded by truckers and travelers, but night is coming. And I can't stop looking in mirrors. The thing is, I know what people will say. Sleep deprivation, stress, mind playing tricks. That's what I would have said before that night on the bridge. But I know what I saw, what I felt, the cold, the breathing, those teeth. I've started covering all the mirrors in my house, putting sheets over them before sunset. But sometimes late at night I catch reflections in windows, in the screen of my TV when it's turned off, in the chrome coffee pot in my kitchen. Always just for a second. Always just a glimpse. A dark suit, gray skin, those empty, hungry eyes. It's following me, waiting. And sooner or later the glimpses will last longer than a second. Sooner or later, I'll feel that cold hand on my shoulder again. Hear that wet breathing behind me. I know how this ends. You don't escape things like this. Not really, they're patient, they have all the time in the world, but I'll keep running anyway. Keep covering mirrors, keep sleeping with the lights on, keep looking over my shoulder. And if you're driving late at night and you see someone standing on a bridge, now don't slow down, don't look in your mirror, just drive. I jerked awake at 3:17 a.m. The digital clock's red numbers were the only light in the unfamiliar bedroom. My heart was pounding, but I didn't know why. The bare walls and stacked moving boxes reminded me where I was. My first night in the new rental house on Cedar Street. A car passed outside, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling. The sound of the engine faded, leaving only silence. Complete silence. No creaks of an old house settling. No hum of the refrigerator. No wind in the trees. Just dead quiet. I sat up in bed, sheets clinging to my sweaty skin. The silence felt wrong. Houses always make some noise, especially old ones like this. But there was nothing. I reached for my phone on the cardboard box serving as a nightstand. The screen showed no notifications, just the time, 3:18 a.m. My throat was dry. I needed water. The wooden floor was cold under my bare feet as I walked to the bedroom door. The The hallway stretched out in darkness. I hadn't installed any nightlights yet. I kept one hand on the wall, feeling my way toward the stairs. The first step creaked under my weight. I froze. In the silence, the sound seemed to echo through the empty house. I counted each step as I descended. 1, 2, 3. The handrail was smooth beneath my palm. When I reached the bottom, I stood still, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. The kitchen was at the back of the house. Moonlight filtered through the window over the sink, casting weak shadows. I found a glass in one of the boxes marked kitchen and filled it from the tap. The water tasted metallic. I made a mental note to buy a filter tomorrow. That's when I heard it. A soft thud from upstairs, like someone setting down a heavy book. I stopped breathing. The glass slipped from my fingers and shattered in the sink. "Hello?" My voice came out as a whisper. No response. I grabbed a knife from the drawer. The handle was slick with sweat as I crept toward the stairs. Each step took forever. At the top, I paused again, straining to hear anything. The silence had returned. I checked every room. The spare bedroom, empty except for boxes. The bathroom, shower curtain drawn back, nothing behind it. My bedroom, bed unmade but untouched. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat on my bed with my back against the wall, knife in hand, watching the sun slowly rise through the window. The next day at work, I could barely keep my eyes open. My coworkers noticed. "Rough night, James?" Sarah from accounting asked when I got my third cup of coffee before noon. "Just getting used to the new place," I said. I didn't mention the noise or the knife I'd slept with. That evening, I installed nightlights in every hallway and bedroom. I checked all the windows and doors twice before going to bed. I even looked in all the closets, feeling stupid but unable to stop myself. Everything was normal. I fell asleep watching Netflix on my laptop. The sound of footsteps woke me. Clear, distinct footsteps on the wooden floor above my head. But I was on the second floor. There was only an attic up there. I lay perfectly still, eyes wide in the dark. The steps moved slowly across the ceiling, heel to toe, heel to toe. They reached the far wall and stopped. Then they started back. My whole body was rigid. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The footsteps reached the middle of the ceiling and stopped again. A loud crash from downstairs broke the spell. I bolted upright, grabbing the knife from under my pillow. More sounds followed. The distinct noise of something being dragged across the floor. My hands shook as I dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm, professional. "Police are on their way. Stay on the line with me. Are you in a safe place?" "I'm in my bedroom," I whispered. "Second floor. Someone's in my house. Can you lock your door?" I got up slowly, trying to avoid making the floorboards creak. 3 steps to the door. The dragging sound continued downstairs. My fingers fumbled with the lock. Red and blue lights flashed through my window. I heard car doors slam, then heavy boots on the front porch. "Police! Open up!" The dragging stopped. When the officers cleared the house, they found nothing. No broken windows, no forced doors. But in the living room, every piece of furniture had been moved to the center of the room, stacked in a precise pyramid. Could someone have gotten in earlier, hidden until night? One officer asked. I shook my head. I checked everything before bed, twice. They took my statement and promised to increase patrols in the area. After they left, I stood in the living room staring at the furniture pyramid. My couch was on top, balanced perfectly on my dining room chairs. It took me an hour to put everything back. I checked my phone. 5:43 a.m. No point trying to sleep now. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, jumping at every small sound. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. I started leaving the TV on for background noise. The silence felt like it was waiting for something. Friday night, I came home late from work. The front door stuck slightly as I opened it. Unusual, since it had been fine that morning. Inside, all the lights were off. I was sure I'd left the living room lamp on. The light switch didn't work. I used my phone's flashlight to check the breaker box in the basement. All the switches were in the correct position, but no power. I called the electric company. "No outages reported in your area, sir. Everything looks normal on our end." I was heading back upstairs when I heard it, the scrape of furniture being moved above me. I swept my phone's light across the basement ceiling. The dragging stopped. My heart pounding, I ran up the stairs and threw open the door to the first floor. The furniture was exactly where I'd left it, but something was different. I looked around slowly, trying to identify what had changed. The pictures, all the framed photos I'd hung, were now upside down. I reached for the nearest one, a family photo from last Christmas. As I touched the frame, every light in the house blazed on at once. The sudden brightness blinded me. When my vision cleared, the photos were right side up again. I stood there, blinking, trying to process what I'd seen. The house was silent except for the hum of electricity. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat in the living room with every light on, watching the shadows in the corners. Around 2 a.m., the TV turned itself off. I pressed the power button. Nothing. Unplugged it and plugged it back in. Still nothing. The footsteps started again, this time on the first floor. Slow, deliberate steps moving from the kitchen toward the living room. I could hear the floorboards creaking under each step. They stopped at the living room doorway. I stared at the empty space, my chest tight with fear. The temperature dropped. I could see my breath in the air. The footsteps started again, moving around the couch where I sat. I tracked their progress by the creaking boards, turning my head to follow the sound. They completed a full circle around me and stopped directly in front. The air was freezing now. My phone lay on the coffee table, but I couldn't make myself reach for it. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out. In the darkness, I heard breathing. Not my own. I ran. I didn't bother with shoes or keys or phone. I just ran out the front door into the night. Behind me, all the lights in the house came back on. Through the living room window, I saw my furniture slowly sliding across the floor, arranging itself into another pyramid. I spent the rest of the night in my car, parked under a streetlight at the nearby gas station. When the sun rose, I drove to a coffee shop and used their Wi-Fi to research the house's history. The local newspaper's online archives went back to the 1950s. I found what I was looking for in an article from 1963. Local man found dead in Cedar Street home. The story was brief. Arnold Wells, 47, discovered by neighbors after they noticed his lights had been on for 3 straight days. The cause of death was listed as unknown. I dug deeper. 2 more deaths in the house over the years. A woman in 1982, another man in 1997. Both ruled natural causes, but both found only after neighbors reported strange lights and noises. My hands shook as I scrolled through the articles. A pattern emerged. Every victim had lived alone. Every death happened within months of moving in. Every body was found in the living room. I called my landlord from the coffee shop parking lot. "Did you know about the deaths?" I demanded. "What deaths?" He sounded genuinely confused. 3 people have died in that house." "That's impossible. I've owned it for 20 years. No one's died there." "Check the records." 1963, 1982, 1997. Silence on the line. Then, "Those must be mistakes. Different house, maybe. Same address, same description, same details about the lights and noises before each death." He hung up. I tried calling back but got voicemail. I had to go back to the house. All my belongings were there, including my laptop with 2 weeks of unsaved work projects. I waited until noon, when the sun was high and bright. The house looked normal in daylight. Birds sang in the trees. A neighbor walked her dog past, waving cheerfully. I waved back, wondering if she'd be the one to find my body. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it during my panicked flight, except the furniture pyramid in the living room. Each piece was back in its proper place, arranged exactly as I'd had them. I ran upstairs and started packing, shoving clothes into garbage bags, dumping desk drawers into boxes. I worked fast, not bothering to organize anything. Just get out, get out, get out. The temperature started dropping around 2 p.m. I could see my breath again. The footsteps began, slow and steady, coming up the stairs. I grabbed what I could carry and ran. Behind me, I heard furniture scraping across floors throughout the house. At the front door, I looked back one last time. Every piece of furniture, every box, every loose item was floating 6 inches off the floor. I left everything else behind. Drove straight to a hotel and booked a week's stay. Called my boss and made up a story about burst pipes forcing me to move. Called the landlord again and told him to keep my security deposit. I wouldn't be back. That was 2 weeks ago. I'm in a new apartment now on the other side of town. Sometimes at night I still hear footsteps above me, but it's just the upstairs neighbors. Yesterday I drove past the house on Cedar Street. There was a "For Rent" sign in the front yard. Through the living room window I could see furniture arranged in a perfect pyramid. I wanted to warn the next tenant. But who would believe me? Who would believe that a house could hunt, could wait, could arrange its kills with geometric precision? All I can do is watch the local news and count the days until I read about another body found in the living room, another unexplained death, another victim of the house that rearranges itself in the dark. I check the real estate listings every day now. 3 days ago, the "For Rent" sign disappeared. Someone new has moved in. When I drive past at night, all the lights are always on. My hands won't stop shaking as I write this. I need to get it down while it's fresh, while I can still hear those voices in my head. 3 days ago, I went hiking on the Cascade Ridge Trail. I've done this hike dozens of times before. Nothing about that morning seemed different. The weather was clear, temperature in the mid-60s, perfect hiking weather. I packed light, water, trail mix, my phone, and a light jacket. The morning fog still clung to the valley as I started up the trail at 7 a.m. The first 2 hours went exactly like they always do. I passed the usual landmarks, the split oak, the red rock formation that looks like a face, the old mining equipment rusting away in the brush. Around 10 a.m. I reached the point where I usually turn back, but the air felt good in my lungs, my legs weren't tired, and I had plenty of water left. I decided to push further up the trail. The path got steeper here, winding through a dense grove of old-growth pines. The ground turned rocky, with loose scree that shifted under my boots. That's when I saw it. Through a gap in the trees, something gray and angular caught my eye. I stepped off the trail, pushing through a tangle of undergrowth. My boots crunched on pine needles as I approached what looked like a wall made of stacked stones. The wall belonged to a small house, maybe 12 feet square. Thick green moss covered most of the stonework. The roof was made of flat stones too, somehow still intact after what must have been decades of winter snow and summer rain. No windows, just a low doorway with no door. I've hiked these mountains for 15 years. I know most of the old structures, abandoned miners' cabins, Forest Service shelters, the remnants of early homesteads, but I'd never seen this place before, never even heard rumors of it. The construction looked older than anything else I'd seen in these mountains. The stones fit together too perfectly, with barely any mortar visible between them. The doorway was short. I had to duck to enter. The air inside felt thick and cool. Dust particles floated in the shaft of sunlight coming through the door. The floor was bare earth, packed hard by time. And the walls were covered in markings. Not graffiti or trail symbols, but intricate patterns carved into the stone. They formed flowing lines that curved and intersected in ways that made my eyes hurt if I looked at them too long. Some of the lines seemed to catch the light differently than others, creating a subtle shimmer when I moved my head. I pulled out my phone to take pictures, but the screen showed only darkness where the carvings should have been. I tried video, same result. The markings simply wouldn't show up on my phone. I reached out to touch one of the patterns. The stone felt warm under my fingers, warmer than it should have given the cool air in the house. Time got weird after that. I know I spent hours studying those walls, tracing the patterns with my fingers, trying to make sense of them. The light through the doorway shifted and dimmed. I didn't notice the sun setting until the interior was almost completely dark. I reached for my phone to use as a flashlight. That's when I heard the first voice. It came from outside, a low murmur that could have been the wind through trees. Except it wasn't. The sound had too much structure, too much intention. More voices joined the first, speaking in what was definitely a language but not one I recognized. The words seemed to slide past my ears without leaving any impression I could grab onto. I pressed myself against the back wall of the house. The voices grew louder, closer. They seemed to circle the building, passing the doorway multiple times. I could see nothing in the darkness, but I felt the air pressure change as something moved past the entrance. My phone showed 9:47 p.m. The screen's blue light made the wall carvings jump and writhe in my peripheral vision. I shut it off quickly. The darkness pressed against my eyes. The voices continued their circuit around the house, the words rising and falling in patterns that made my teeth ache. A new sound joined the voices, a scraping, like stone grinding against stone. It came from the walls around me. The temperature in the house dropped. I could see my breath in the faint starlight coming through the door. The grinding sound grew louder, and I felt the wall behind me vibrate. I ran. I don't remember deciding to move. One moment I was pressed against the wall, the next I was bursting through the doorway. I caught a glimpse of something tall and dark against the starlit sky, something that definitely wasn't a tree. Then I was running down the mountain, stumbling over rocks and roots in the darkness. The voices followed me. They stayed just far enough behind that I couldn't make out any distinct words, but close enough that I knew they were there. My lungs burned. Branches whipped my face. I lost the trail almost immediately, but I kept running downhill, knowing the road had to be somewhere below. I fell 3 times. The first time I scraped my palms bloody on sharp rocks. The second time, I slammed my knee into a tree trunk. The third time, I rolled down a steep slope and landed in a shallow creek. The cold water shocked me back to some kind of clarity. I lay there for a moment, listening. The voices were gone. The only sounds were my ragged breathing and water running over rocks. My phone showed 11:23 p.m. Somehow I'd been running for over an hour. It took me another 2 hours to find my way back to the road. I walked 3 miles in the dark before a passing truck gave me a ride back to my car. The driver didn't ask why I was soaking wet and covered in dirt at 1 a.m. I think I'm grateful for that. Yesterday I went back up the trail with 2 friends. We hiked past my usual turning point, all the way to where I thought I'd found the stone house. There was nothing there. No walls, no foundation, not even a clearing in the trees where a building could have stood. My friends thought I was crazy, especially when I couldn't explain why we'd hiked 4 hours just to look at an unremarkable patch of forest. But I know what I saw. I have the scrapes on my palms and the bruise on my knee to prove it. And I have something else too. This morning, I noticed something in the mirror while brushing my teeth. On the side of my neck, just below my ear, there's a mark. It looks like one of the patterns from the walls of the stone house, a series of curved lines that seem to shift slightly when I'm not looking directly at them. I tried to take a picture of it. Just like in the house, it won't show up on camera, but I can feel it when I touch it. The skin there is warm, warmer than it should be. The mark is spreading. Each morning it covers a little more of my neck. And last night, lying in bed, I heard them again. The voices. They were distant, maybe coming from the mountains, maybe just from inside my head. But I could almost understand them this time. Almost. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know what happened, because I'm not sure how much longer I'll be able to tell the story. The mark has reached my jawline now. When I press my fingers against it, I feel vibrations like stone grinding against stone. And the voices are getting clearer. They're telling me to go back to the house. They're telling me it's time to learn what the patterns mean. They're telling me I've been chosen. I'm going back up the mountain tomorrow. I know the house will be there this time. They've promised me it will be. They've promised to teach me everything. Their language, their symbols, their truth. They say I'm ready now. They say the mark proves it. If you're reading this and you hike the Cascade Ridge Trail, don't go past the red rock formation that looks like a face. Don't explore any strange buildings you find in the woods. And if you hear voices speaking in a language you don't understand, run. Run as fast and as far as you can. But I can't run anymore. The mark has spread too far, and the voices are too loud to ignore. They're calling me home. I know that sounds crazy. But the craziest part is, I want to go. The patterns on my skin burn with possibility. The unknown language echoes in my dreams, almost forming into words I can grasp. There are so many secrets waiting in that stone house, so much knowledge carved into those ancient walls. Tomorrow I'll climb the mountain one last time. Tomorrow I'll learn what it means to be chosen. Tomorrow I'll finally understand. I need to write this down while it's still fresh in my mind, even though my hands are shaking so bad I can barely type. What happened last night on that bridge? I know how it sounds, but every word is true. I drive for Midwest Express Trucking. Nothing fancy, just hauling loads between Chicago and Minneapolis 3 times a week. Usually I stick to I-94, but last night I decided to take the back roads through Wisconsin. Big mistake. The dispatcher had been riding my ass about fuel costs, and I figured the shorter route would save some diesel. Plus, I was ahead of schedule for once and thought the quiet country roads would be a nice change of pace. It was around 2 a.m. when my eyes started getting heavy. The roads were completely empty, just endless cornfields and patches of forest lit up by my high beams. My coffee thermos had been empty for hours. I knew I needed to pull over before I drove myself into a ditch. I spotted this old concrete bridge up ahead spanning a small river. There was just enough room on the shoulder to park safely, so I pulled over and killed the engine. The silence hit me immediately. No cars, no wind, not even crickets. Just the soft gurgle of water flowing beneath the bridge. I reclined my seat back and closed my eyes, figuring I'd grab a quick power nap. That's when I heard it. A sound that made my skin crawl. Crying. Not loud sobbing, but this quiet, hitching kind of weeping, like someone trying to hold it in but failing. At first I thought I was imagining things, sleep deprivation playing tricks on my mind. But the crying continued, echoing slightly under the bridge. It sounded like a woman or maybe a child. I sat there for probably 5 minutes debating with myself. Every instinct told me to start the engine and get the hell out of there. But what if someone was hurt? What if they needed help? My hand was trembling as I pulled the flashlight from my glove compartment. The beam flickered weakly. I couldn't remember the last time I'd changed the batteries. I stepped out of the cab, and the gravel crunched under my boots. The crying got a little louder. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone down there? Are you okay?" The weeping stopped abruptly. Complete silence. Even the river seemed to go quiet. I walked to the edge of the bridge, sweeping my flashlight back and forth. The beam barely reached the water about 15 feet below. Ancient concrete supports were thick with moss and water stains. I couldn't see anyone. "If you need help, I can call 911. I tried again. My voice sounded thin and scared, even to my own ears. That's when I saw it. A figure sitting on a concrete ledge just above the waterline. It looked like a woman in a pale dress, but something was wrong. The edges were blurry, like trying to look through frosted glass. I couldn't make out any clear features. I aimed my flashlight directly at it. The beam caught the figure full on, and for a split second I saw... Jesus, I don't even know how to describe it. Where a face should have been, there was just smooth, blank skin. No eyes, no mouth, no features at all. Just this horrible flesh-colored oval. The thing's head snapped toward me with a sickening crack. Then it simply vanished, like smoke dispersing in wind. The flashlight slipped from my numb fingers and clattered on the bridge. I ran. I've never moved so fast in my life. My boots pounding on the asphalt sounded impossibly loud in the silence. I yanked open the truck door and threw myself inside, fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life and I stomped on the gas. The tires spun on the loose gravel before finding purchase. I was doing at least 70 on a road marked for 45, but I didn't care. My hands were locked on the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. That's when I made the mistake of glancing in my rearview mirror. It was following me. Not running, more like gliding, floating just above the road surface. That blank face was tilted at an impossible angle, like its neck was broken. Its dress rippled in wind that didn't exist, and it was gaining on me. I pushed the accelerator all the way to the floor. The engine whined in protest as I hit 85, then 90. The thing was still there, matching my speed exactly. Always the same distance behind me, no matter how fast I drove. My headlights caught a road sign, junction with Highway 53 coming up in 2 miles. If I could just make it to the main road. I don't know why, but I felt like that would make a difference, like maybe this thing could only exist out here in the dark back roads. The engine temperature gauge was creeping into the red zone. I'd never pushed this old truck so hard. 1 mile to go. The thing was still there, that horrible blank face perfectly centered in my mirror. Half a mile. My hands were so sweaty they kept slipping on the wheel. Every curve in the road felt like it might send me flying into the ditch. I saw the highway ahead, a ribbon of lighter darkness against the fields. The junction was marked by a single flashing yellow light. Almost there. Something slammed into the back of the truck. The whole cab shuddered. In the mirror, I saw pale hands pressed against my back window. Long fingers, too many joints. The blank face was inches from the glass. I screamed. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I screamed like a child as I yanked the wheel hard, making the turn onto Highway 53 at speed. The truck's tires squealed. For a terrible moment, I felt the trailer start to jackknife. Then I was on the highway straightening out. A car passed in the opposite direction, the first traffic I'd seen in hours. I checked the mirror. Nothing. The thing was gone. I drove straight through to Minneapolis without stopping. The sun was coming up by the time I pulled into the depot. My supervisor chewed me out for being late with the delivery, but I barely heard him. I called in sick for my next 3 runs. Told them I had the flu. That was 2 days ago. I haven't slept more than an hour at a time since then. Every time I close my eyes, I see that blank face. Those impossible hands reaching for me. I did some research online. Turns out there are stories about that bridge going back decades. In 1962, a young woman jumped to her death there after her baby was stillborn. In 1985, 2 teenage girls disappeared in the area. Their bodies were never found. There are dozens of accounts from drivers who've had experiences similar to mine. Some say they heard crying. Others saw the figure by the water. A few claim they were chased. I've been driving that route for 8 years. How many times did I pass that bridge in the dark, never knowing what was waiting there? How many other places like this are out there, haunted by things that shouldn't exist? I have another run to Chicago scheduled for tomorrow night. I told the dispatcher I'll only do it if I can stick to the interstate. He wasn't happy, said the fuel costs are too high. I don't care. I'll quit before I take another back road at night. But even on the interstate, I know I'll be checking my mirror at every dark stretch of highway, watching for a pale figure gliding above the asphalt, wondering if maybe, just maybe, it followed me home that night, wondering if it's waiting for me somewhere up ahead in the darkness. The worst part? Sometimes when my apartment is completely quiet, I swear I can hear crying, just on the edge of hearing. A soft, hitching sound, like someone trying to hold it in but failing. And it's getting closer. I should have known something was wrong when I saw the scratched-out number on the door. The brass 13 had been gouged away, leaving only rough marks in the wood. But the rent was cheap, and I needed a place fast after my divorce. That's how I ended up in Riverside Apartments, an old brick building from the 1920s that smelled like dust and old radiators. The real estate agent, Mrs. Peterson, didn't mention anything about the scratched number when she showed me the place. She just rattled on about the vintage charm and original hardwood floors. I noticed how she kept checking her phone, rushing through the showing. When I asked about other tenants, she said the building was empty during renovations. Just me, alone in a 6-story building. Perfect for focusing on work, she said. I moved in on a Tuesday. The moving company dropped off my boxes in the afternoon. Just the basics, since Sarah kept most of our stuff. A bed, desk, couch, TV, and some kitchen things. The empty rooms echoed with every footstep. My shoes left marks in the dust on the floor. The windows were grimy, filtering the sunlight into a dirty yellow glow. The first night was quiet. I ordered pizza, unpacked some boxes, and fell asleep on the couch watching Netflix. Normal stuff. The heating pipes knocked and groaned, but that's typical in old buildings. I woke up around 3 a.m. with a stiff neck and dragged myself to bed. The second night is when it started. I was sitting at my desk, trying to finish some work reports when I heard it. A scraping sound from above, like furniture being dragged across the floor. My ceiling light flickered. I looked up, listening. The sound moved from one end of the room to the other, slow and deliberate. Then it stopped. My heart was pounding. I stood up, my chair squeaking against the floor. The building was supposed to be empty. I grabbed my phone and called Mrs. Peterson, straight to voicemail. The scraping started again. This time it was followed by footsteps, heavy, slow steps moving back and forth. My hands were sweating as I pulled up the building's website. No contact number for maintenance or security. Just the real estate office, closed until morning. I walked to my front door and pressed my ear against it. The hallway was silent. The footsteps continued above, and now I could hear something else. Voices. Not clear enough to make out words, just low murmurs and whispers. My mouth went dry. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The emergency lights cast a dim glow over the faded carpet. I walked to the stairwell, my footsteps sounding too loud in the empty building. The door to the stairs creaked when I opened it. Looking up, I could see the next landing, floor 14. But that wasn't right. I was on the 13th floor. Even though the number was scratched out, I knew that's where I was. I counted again. Ground floor, then 1 through 12, then my floor, then 14. No mistake. The voices grew louder. I started climbing the stairs, my legs feeling heavy with each step. The temperature dropped as I went up. My breath came out in visible puffs. The whispers seemed to be coming from everywhere now. I reached the 14th floor landing. The door was identical to mine, but the paint was peeling and black mold grew around the frame. The brass number 14 was tarnished but intact. The whispers were clear now, coming from behind the door. Multiple voices, speaking in low tones. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. It was ice cold. I turned it slowly, and the door opened with a long creak. The hallway beyond was dark. The emergency lights were out. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam showed empty space where the floor should have been, just a black void stretching down. The walls were covered in thick black mold. Cold air rushed past me, carrying the smell of rot. I stumbled backward, slamming the door shut. My phone light flickered and died. The darkness felt thick, pressing against me. I ran down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. I could hear the whispers following me, growing louder. I burst into my hallway and sprinted to my apartment. The door wouldn't open. The key wouldn't turn. Panic rose in my throat as I kept trying, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the key. Behind me, something moved in the darkness. Finally, the lock clicked. I threw myself inside and slammed the door, turning all the locks. I stood there, breathing hard, listening. The whispers faded away. Above me, the scraping sound started again. I spent the rest of the night sitting in my living room with all the lights on, jumping at every sound. When the sun came up, I called Mrs. Peterson again. This time she answered. "The 14th floor?" She sounded confused. "That's impossible. The building only has 13 floors. "But I was just there," I said. "I saw it. Mr. Walker, I have the original building plans right here. 13 floors, that's all. Are you feeling all right?" I hung up and opened my laptop. I searched for information about Riverside Apartments. The building had a history. In 1943, a fire had destroyed the top floor, the 14th floor. 13 people died. The floor was never rebuilt. The articles showed old photos of the building with 14 floors, but recent pictures showed only 13. The scraping sound started again. I packed a bag and checked into a hotel. When I came back the next day to get more of my things, The building was empty. Not just empty, abandoned. Boards covered the windows. The front door was chained shut. A condemnation notice from the city was taped to the wall, dated 1985. I stood there staring at the building, my key still in my hand. Above, on what should have been my floor, I saw movement behind one of the grimy windows. A face pressed against the glass. Then another, and another. Their mouths moved, whispering words I couldn't hear. I left my stuff behind. All of it. Drove straight to the real estate office. It was empty too, dusty and abandoned like it had been closed for years. Mrs. Peterson's business card in my wallet had turned yellow and brittle. The phone number faded away. That was 3 weeks ago. I'm staying with my brother now, trying to make sense of what happened. Last night I got a voicemail from an unknown number. When I played it, I heard the scraping sound, then the whispers. They were clearer this time. They were saying my name. I looked up the building's history again today. Found an article from 1944 about the fire. There was a list of victims. The last name on the list was James Walker. My name. The article included a photo of him. The man in the picture could have been my twin. The whispers are getting louder now. Even here, miles away from the building. They're calling me back. Back to the 13th floor that was never meant to exist. Back to the voices that know my name. Tonight, I'm going back to the building. I have to know the truth. I have to know why they scratched out the number. Why they're calling me. I have to know what's on the 14th floor. I'm writing this down in case I don't come back. If you're reading this and you see an apartment listing for Riverside Apartments, don't take it. Count the floors. Look for the scratched out numbers. Listen for the whispers. They're getting louder now. I can hear the scraping sound above me, even though I'm on the top floor of my brother's house. They're waiting for me. I have to go now. The door is opening. The name that echoed through the trees was mine. I heard it clear as day, carried on a blast of frigid air that had no business being there on a warm June morning in Georgia. I stood frozen, staring at the spot where the muddy footprints just stopped. Let me back up. I need to tell this right. I started my morning like I had hundreds of times before, up at 5 a.m., laced up my running shoes, and headed to the Cedar Creek Trail. The sun wasn't up yet. Just that gray pre-dawn light filtering through the trees. The air felt thick and warm, typical Georgia summer morning. My t-shirt was already sticking to my back by the time I reached the trailhead. I'd been running these trails for 3 years since my divorce. The routine kept me sane. Wake up, run, shower, work, repeat. I knew every route, every turn, every incline, which is why the footprints caught my attention right away. They weren't there yesterday. The rain last night had left the trail muddy, and these prints were fresh in the wet earth. Someone had passed through here this morning, before me. Barefoot. Who goes running barefoot on a forest trail in the dark? The prints were deep, like whoever made them was running hard. They weaved back and forth across the trail, not following the usual runner's path. I stopped, pulled out my phone, and took a picture. Something felt off about them. The stride length was wrong, too long for normal running steps. I should have turned around right then, should have gone back to my car and driven home. But I didn't. Instead, I followed them. The prints led deeper into the woods, off the main trail onto one of the less used side paths. The tree canopy got thicker here, blocking out most of the growing dawn light. I clicked on my headlamp, sweeping the beam across the ground to track the footprints. They grew more erratic the further I went. Sometimes the steps were so far apart it looked like whoever made them had jumped or leaped between spots. Other times they clustered together, like the person had stopped and shuffled around in circles. My breaths came faster now, and not from exertion. The warm air had grown cooler as I went deeper into the woods. The familiar morning sounds, birds, insects, distant traffic, had faded away. All I could hear was my own breathing and the crunch of leaves under my feet. After about half a mile, the side trail opened into a small clearing. The footprints led straight across it, to the far side where the trees grew close together. I followed them to the edge of the clearing, and there they stopped. Just ended. Mid-stride, like whoever made them had taken one last step and vanished into thin air. I swept my headlamp back and forth across the ground. Nothing. No signs of someone changing direction. No scuff marks, no disturbance in the leaves or underbrush on either side. Just a line of clear footprints that terminated abruptly in the middle of nowhere. That's when I felt it. A pocket of air so cold it made my teeth ache. In June, in Georgia. The beam of my headlamp caught something in the air. Not quite mist, more like the way heat waves distort your vision over hot pavement. Except this was different. Wrong. The air rippled and twisted, and on the other side of that ripple I caught a glimpse of something. A darkness deeper than the pre-dawn shadows. A movement that shouldn't have been possible. And then I heard my name. Daniel. It wasn't a shout. Not even really a whisper. More like the memory of a sound carried on that impossible cold breeze. But it was unmistakably my name, spoken in a voice that made every hair on my body stand up. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. My headlamp beam jerked wildly across the trees. The ripple in the air followed the light, or maybe the light followed it. I couldn't tell which was moving and which was still. Daniel. Closer now. The cold intensified, burning my lungs with each breath. I saw my exhales forming clouds in the beam of the headlamp. The ripple in the air grew larger, spreading out like a tear in reality. I turned to run. My foot caught on a root and I went down hard, landing on my hands and knees in the mud. The impact knocked the headlamp off my head. It rolled a few feet away, the beam spinning crazily through the trees. The cold pressed in around me. I could feel it seeping through my clothes, into my skin, into my bones. My fingers wouldn't work right as I tried to push myself up. They felt stiff, like I'd been out in winter weather without gloves. Daniel, come see. The voice was right behind me now. I didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at me not to turn around. But my body moved on its own, my head turning slowly to face that impossible cold spot. The ripple had become a tear, a vertical slice in the air itself. Through it I saw nothing. Not darkness. Not empty space. Nothing. My mind couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. It was like trying to remember a dream that slips away as soon as you wake up. Something moved in that nothing. A shape formed, or maybe it had always been there and I was only now able to perceive it. It had height, width, depth, but none of those dimensions seemed to work quite right. It was like looking at a drawing of an impossible shape, except this was real and three-dimensional and moving toward me. I scrambled backward on all fours, my hands and feet slipping in the mud. My back hit a tree trunk. The headlamp beam caught the edge of the tear in reality, illuminating a border of crystalline frost forming in the air. The shape emerged further from the tear. It had what might have been a head, and limbs that might have been arms and legs, but they bent and moved in ways that human joints don't allow. Its surface seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Daniel, we've been waiting. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It bypassed my ears and spoke directly into my mind. With it came images, flashes of places that couldn't exist, cities built from geometries that hurt to look at, seas of something that wasn't water flowing in directions that weren't up or down, skies filled with stars that pulsed with wrong colors. My chest felt tight. I couldn't get enough air. The cold had worked its way into my lungs, each breath burning like I was inhaling liquid nitrogen. My vision started to blur around the edges. The shape reached for me with one of its not-quite arms. I saw my breath crystallize in the air between us, forming patterns of frost that looked like the equations I'd glimpsed in those impossible cities. Some kind of survival instinct finally kicked in. I lurched to my feet, ignoring the shooting pain in my twisted ankle. I ran. I left the headlamp behind, running blind through the pre-dawn forest. Branches whipped at my face. I tripped and stumbled over roots and rocks, but I kept going, The cold followed. I could feel it at my back trying to work its way into my muscles to slow me down. The voice kept calling my name, growing more insistent, more hungry. I had no idea if I was heading in the right direction. Everything looked different in the dim light. But I ran full out, letting pure animal panic guide me. My lungs burned from the combination of exertion and cold. My legs felt like lead. "Daniel, don't leave. Show you more." The voice was fainter now, or maybe farther away. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The ripple in the air was still there, following about 20 feet behind me, but it seemed smaller. The shape inside it had retreated, becoming indistinct again. I pushed harder, ignoring the stabbing pain in my side. Gradually, the air began to feel warmer. The first rays of actual sunlight started penetrating the tree canopy. I heard a car horn in the distance, the morning commute starting on the highway near the park. The voice called my name one last time, so faint it might have been just the wind in the trees. The cold faded. When I looked back again, the ripple was gone. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking so bad I could barely get the door unlocked. Once inside, I slammed the door and hit the locks. I sat there for a long time, engine running, heater on full blast, waiting for my breathing to slow down and the shaking to stop. The sun was fully up now. The parking lot was empty except for my car. Everything looked normal, just another summer morning in Georgia. But my clothes were covered in mud. My ankle was swollen and my hands were red and chapped from the cold that shouldn't have been possible. I never found my headlamp. I never went back to look for it. I don't run on those trails anymore. I switched to a gym membership, running on treadmills under bright fluorescent lights where I can see everything around me. But sometimes, usually around dawn, I feel a sudden chill in the air. Just for a second. Just long enough to make me wonder. And in those moments, I swear I can hear something calling my name, inviting me to see more of those impossible places that my mind still can't fully remember. I know they're still out there, waiting in that tear between what's real and what isn't, and they know my name. Sometimes I dream about what I saw through that tear. I wake up with geometric frost patterns on my bedroom window, patterns that melt away as soon as the sun hits them. The doctors say my occasional chest pains are just anxiety. They say the patches of numb, waxy skin on my hands are from poor circulation. They don't believe me when I tell them how cold it gets in my house, even in the middle of summer. They don't see how my breath fogs in the air when I'm alone at night. They can't hear the whispers. But I know what's real. I know what I saw that morning on the trail. And I know that sooner or later they'll find a way through that tear. They'll come looking for me again. I've started seeing the footprints again. Not on the trail. I won't go near there. But in other places. Outside my apartment, in the parking lot at work, leading up to my door and stopping abruptly, as if whatever makes them simply ceases to exist mid-step. The cold spots are spreading too. I find them in random places, my kitchen, my office, the grocery store. Little pockets of winter in the middle of summer. And always, always, that voice calling my name. I've thought about moving away, but I don't think distance matters to them. They exist in that space between spaces. They can probably find me anywhere. So I stay. I keep to well-lit places. I don't go out at dawn or dusk. I run on treadmills and sleep with the lights on. And I write this down, all of it, exactly as it happened. No embellishments, no metaphors, just the plain truth of what I saw and what I continue to see. Because someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand what's out there, waiting in those cold spots between what we think is real and what actually exists. They know our names, they're patient, and they're getting closer. I hear them now as I write this. The temperature in my room is dropping. Frost is forming on my keyboard. My breath fogs in front of the screen. Daniel, they're calling again. And this time I think they're going to show me more whether I want to see it or not.